Our work session today, we have 4 items on the agenda, and we are going to kick things off in our continued discussion with district staff and RTI International regarding our development of the strategic plan. And Superintendent Moore, is there anything you'd like to?
No, I just get to work.
All right, excellent. Dr. Gardner.
Good afternoon, Board Chair Mahaffey, members of the board, and Superintendent Moore. We are again very excited to join you this afternoon to continue our discussion around strategic priorities that will lead and shape and inform our eventual strategic plan. This afternoon, we have a number of things that we're going to try to accomplish with our time with you, and I'm excited to have both our RTI representative, Frederica Nash, with us, as well as Brad McMillan, our Assistant Superintendent from Data Research and Accountability. And I'm going to ask if we can go ahead and get the slide deck. Thank you. You will notice on the slide deck today, we're trying to accomplish several things with you. We're going to review the suggested additions / feedback we received from you in our earlier work about the belief statements. We want to share with you, again, the incorporation of some added words to one of them, but also the new additional one that we have drafted in response to your feedback. Then we're going to look at the strategic priority focus areas based on stakeholder input in our effort to continuously narrow it down in a very intentional and purposeful way so that they're streamlined and targeted. And then we're going to try to get some input from you about your desire around a long-term overarching goal, as well as some other goals tied to the priority focus areas, and share with you a little bit the structure that we're reviewing for shaping this work going into the fall. So we've got a lot we want to accomplish with you this afternoon. So thank you again for your time and the feedback we know we're going to get from you. And I'm going to turn it over to Frederica this time.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner, and good afternoon, Board. I'm here with you today. Mike and I were split, so I got you today, and he had you the last time. So I'm excited to be here. So on the next slide, this was just a reorientation to the existing mission, vision, and set of core beliefs that we started this work. We were looking at to reaffirm or make any suggested changes to this. And so during our discussions and from your input on the next slide, we are reviewing 2 additions to the existing core beliefs. So in core belief number 4 on slide 3, your feedback is reflected with the addition of well-being and student agency that we had conversations about that emerged. And additionally, there's a draft of a new core belief number 7 that is reflective of your feedback on the explicit need to underscore operations within the core beliefs. And so today we are looking at core belief number 7. For your initial thoughts, what resonates, what does not resonate with you. This being your first time seeing this belief, so we're not wordsmithing or asking you to give us a thumbs up today, but we will do that the next time that we are together. We want to solicit some additional feedback from you for this particular core belief number 7 that reads, all students and staff deserve to work in optimal learning environments supported by sufficient resources, well-maintained facilities, and effective operational systems. So as you read that and you review, what are some initial things that resonate with you or do not resonate with you around that core belief?
Dr. Martin.
So overall, I like it, and I like the addition. I think it's appropriate to have it be a 7th point as opposed to trying to fit it somewhere else. My first reaction is I always get a little spooked at, optimal learning environments, which I love it, but that's not something that we're going to be able to, we just don't have the resources to be able to do. So I think, my first reaction is effective instead of optimal, because I can effectively teach under a tree if I have to. It's not great, but I'm just a little cautious about the promise, but I like the intent.
I will say I think we were looking at it as a sort of desired aspirational state versus.
Absolutely.
But,
no, I'm 100% there. It's just I always have to sort of backtrack and say,
right. No, you're right.
Where's the lever that's going to be used against us?
Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. And 7's a lucky number, so I think it's good. But
We hope
in
so.
the first two beliefs, we say every student, and then in 7, we say all students. So I can hold that. I mean, I can understand why it's different, but do we, I'm just
I
wondering.
think the parallel of every student and all staff might work.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I do think it captures our feedback about, just the physical space for teaching and learning that we want for our staff and students. Thank you.
Ms. Cash?
So are these the ones we're looking at? So I didn't read all of them, but is there something in here about financial, the
Well,
community?
we did the first 6 we did last time we talked about, so this 7th one is an addition.
So we weren't going to add anything about, I thought the community had said quite a bit about their students learning the financial.
Oh, Ms. Cash, that's later in the presentation. I peeked
Oh,
ahead.
okay, good. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, you read.
Okay, good.
It's available for me to look.
I do know, and this has been raised, that the word sustainability is something that has come up a lot from many different stakeholders. What are the thoughts of where that belongs? Is that, if not necessarily in a core belief, is that an underpinning of one of the core beliefs as we're moving forward in this? What are y'all thinking?
Thank you, Chairman Haffey. We did have that discussion because we knew that on several occasions the board has talked about sustainability. It's particularly some of the interest that's been expressed by our community. We were thinking that it would be nested under this with regard to whether it be operational systems that support sustainability efforts and or even with facilities. We tried to choose words to the point of optimal that also is kind of encompassing of a number of factors. That's why we went with the word optimal as well as operational that would cover things of sustainability, even funding, transportation, all the types of systems that support the operations of our school.
Okay, thank you for
We
answering that.
played with how we could word it out, but it started getting so lengthy and kind of fragmented, we thought we didn't want to lose the spirit of the overall belief as it's stated here for your review, but we did see it nested under the operational piece,
Thank you.
which could end up being a very related action step later for the appropriate department or team.
Okay. Any further comments or questions from board members?
Okay, so thank you for that. So now I'm going to turn the conversation over to Brad to recap and extend the discussion on stakeholder engagement.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start by just reprising a few slides from the last time we had this conversation at last month's Student Achievement Committee meeting, and then also kind of go a little bit forward into sort of some additional thinking that the group has done around how to get us to sort of a more finer point on some of the stakeholder outcomes that come from the feedback that we gathered. So here on this initial slide, you can see we're back to the 12 themes. Oops, a little forward, Melissa. One more. Oop. One more. Right there. The initial 12 themes that came from the thought exchange activity that we did with our parents, staff, community, and students. And you may recall at the last meeting, we tried to kind of mush this down into something a little bit more strategic and a little bit more targeted. And so on the next slide here, you can see we went from 12 to 7 by putting all of the 4 C's together, even though they often were mentioned separately in the thought exchange. We also grouped empathy and respect into a single category and got from here to 7. And then we went back through the data and looked at among these 7 themes, what were sort of the importance ratings that were given to these 7 themes by the 4 stakeholder groups that participated separately in the thought exchange, which brought us to this table here that you probably recall from the Student Achievement Committee meeting, showing which things were ranked highest in terms of their importance for each of these 4 groups. And you can look at the similarities and differences across those areas. And so to try and take us from this table to something maybe a little bit more fine-grained that gets us down to something specific enough for a plan, but nonetheless honors all of the feedback and all of the sentiments that were captured in the thought exchange process. On the next slide, you can see that we went back to the original 12 and tried to see if we could kind of narrow them down a little bit more. And we ended up proposing that they be put maybe in 3 buckets. Here, looking at 4 Cs, and then looking at a couple of other buckets based on the content items that were mentioned in Thought Exchange, both our core content subject area pieces plus digital and financial literacy, and then also taking the social emotional competence, the respect, the empathy, and the work habits, and trying to put those together into one category, which you'll see represented here on the next slide. Where we felt like we could get down to 3 while still honoring all of the content that was in there that gives the priorities a little bit more focus. And so you can see 4 Cs is one, literacies, knowledge, and skills is the other, which encompasses all of the traditional subject area matter in schools that kids are normally exposed to, plus digital and financial literacy, since our stakeholders shared those like discreetly and specifically as things that they wanted to see. And then took all of the other categories and put them under the umbrella of what we're calling behavioral health, which includes social emotional well-being, empathy, respect, and the work ethic and work habits items like perseverance and being on time and all those other things that people mentioned under that larger umbrella of behavioral health. So before we go too much further with this, take a look on the next slide. You can see how something like this might line up in a plan where we've got the vision, mission, and core beliefs sort of as our foundation pieces on the left, and then moving to the right, aligning those to these 3 possible student outcomes, which would be the highest priority items to achieve that mission and vision statement. So before we go too much further, I just wanted to pause here and get reactions, thoughts as to whether or not you feel like this sort of honors the community feedback, but gives us enough of a focus that we're not trying to do 12 separate things all at once. The other piece I'll add here is that these 3 categories, it just so happens, look like they're mapping on really, really well to an activity going on at the state where they're trying to develop a profile of a graduate for our state by using some outside consultants. And they've been gathering feedback from the same stakeholder groups we've been looking at only statewide, and their initial drafts of what those things are map almost directly onto these 3 categories here. So it sounds like there's a lot of overlap between what the state is hearing parents say and what we're hearing parents say about what we want kids to be able to walk away with when they leave us after high school. So with that, I'll just sort of pause for comments, reflections, or thoughts about whether or not we're going in a good direction here.
Ms. Cash.
I think you did a great job
Thank you.
of putting that together. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the summary is great. When I first looked at it, I said, well, where's our new belief number 7 showing up in this list of 3? And then I read through the rest of the presentation. I see it's coming up later, and then I also saw that this is really strategic priorities for student outcomes, not strategic priorities overall. So my only thought on this is that we may need a parallel somewhere where it's other strategic priorities. We clearly want the strategic priorities for student outcomes. That's clearly a lot of what we do. But I think some of what we're talking about in the strategic planning is we can't ignore this, but there's other work that we have to also have strategic planning for as well. So, and that wasn't part of the thought exchange to the same extent, so I understand why it's not here. But there's one part of me that we can't do it in a whole nother thought exchange, so I'm not asking for that. But there's one part of me that feels like we need some of that input as well. I mean, what is the community's sentiment toward the new schools versus the renovation? How far you travel to schools, safety issues, you name it. So that's my only thought here. I really like what you did with this. It's just I feel like there's going to be a need for a little bit of a parallel set of strategic priorities somewhere.
And Dr. Martin, I think that's a great point, and I think it could lend itself to some great opportunity as we begin to map out specific action steps to get to these student outcomes. As we get ready to outline some of the essential conditions you see, which speak specifically to some of those operations and facilities and structure things. as we write action steps around that, I think we could take it a step further about the input that you're seeking from community on those specific items. Since we were so focused on trying to separate student outcome versus adult behavior to get us to the student outcomes, we were focused on the student outcomes through this. And that's kind of how it led us to shape it into three big focus areas we have here for your review. That's a good point.
Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. And just thinking of those on slide 10, the literacies, knowledge, and skills. I think the 4 Cs, I'm thinking of where are the arts in that gray space. So we have math, reading, language arts, social studies, digital, financial literacy. We don't have the arts spelled out. Whereas I do think the arts support all of those, and critical thinking, creativity. I mean, it's such an important part of who we are in Wake County that I would at least like it's, I don't know, like it spelled out in the excellence, and that's a content area, I suppose.
Yes.
It's a skill, and just thinking of the legacy of Liz Grimes-Dressler, that's fresh on my mind, and her arts integration, and getting toward more just integration of not just the arts, but just the way we teach, more integrated across content areas as a way of getting away from just standardized testing and testable content. I hope that we can embrace that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think when we first started trying to put these words around here with the space we had, we felt like we were trying to write like an Oscars acceptance speech a little bit. We just need to play around with the words a little bit to say that it's like everything such as, but not limited to, right? Because I think you make a great point.
One of our core content.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think we can, the content that's out to the right of all these is kind of what's nested under these. And so I do think we can add the arts, we should add the arts, because they're literacies and arts we also are trying to achieve with our students as well. So it's the whole umbrella of that with the content.
You have comprehensive, wonderful curriculum in Wake County,
Yes.
and that's our absolute strength. Thank you.
But I can't echo enough what Dr. McMillan has already shared with you. When we started getting some preliminary glimpse into what the state is doing for the graduate profile, the alignment is just unbelievable and brought great smiles to our faces to see that there is such alignment with what we heard from our respective community with what the work is hearing from the statewide. And as you pointed out, it was aligned with what you were hearing from your respective conversations with your stakeholder groups as well. So we were very pleased with that.
So we just know they're listening to our work sessions?
Exactly. I won't go that far. I've seen similar questions. I've seen them use similar questions that we have been using, but who's saying it? But you gave me the opportunity to say that.
I do want to say, from setting up those questions to finding a format to reach so many stakeholders, to engage with so many folks, and now being able to narrow all of that engagement in a way that whittles it down but doesn't dismiss any of what we heard from those stakeholders, I think is a great feat. So I just want to thank you all for that work. It's not easy. It seemed seamless over on this side, but being able to get here, I think, is a great space. And I know there's more to come on this in the future slides, but I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. So thank you, and thank you to all of our stakeholders that participated.
Yes, thank you very much.
On the next slide here, then, we want to sort of pause here and get some feedback from you all on another question that has to do with our student outcomes, and that is, how do we want to represent sort of the outward expression of how we're going to hold ourselves accountable for these outcomes? You may recall in the Vision 2020 plan, we had a single overarching goal, which we've actually rewritten here on this slide, only flipped the year forward about 5 years. Not to say that this has to be an overarching goal of the plan, but if you had one, it could sound something like the one we had in the last one. And obviously the words around it are something that, we want you to give consideration to, maybe so that we can talk about it at a future meeting. But also then the question of, do you want the plan to have a long-term goal? Do you want it to have a goal for each of the focus areas, or do you want to have both in terms of what our public-facing sort of story is that we want to tell about this plan? Because I think you could kind of go about any way you wanted to go with that. The other opportunity I think we have, as you're thinking about that with the goal-setting discussion this time, is in our last plan, we had basically district-wide goals for a lot of things. X% of students will do X, X% of schools will do Y. This is also a place where if you wanted to sort of put something behind the equity piece, you could establish goals that didn't just have a district-wide overall number or district-wide average, whereby we could have tons of variation within the district. But you could think about goals that were sort of phrased in terms of all schools will have at least A, B, C, D outcome, or all student subgroups will have at least A, B, C, D outcome. So I think that's a place where we might be able to kind of make equity a more visible part of the goal statements this time, maybe in a way that they weren't the last time. And I think you can do that respective of whether you have one goal or multiple goals, but just sort of food for thought as we go forward. Subgroup achievement as opposed to overall achievement, things like that. So, and obviously these things could also go, from pre-K through 12. You could have an elementary, a middle, and a high school goal, for example. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a pre-K 12 district-wide goal as well. So I think there's probably some room there for doing some things a little different if the board is wanting to entertain that as a way to either build in some equity or build in some more specificity in some of those goals. So just wanted to hear your thoughts, initial reactions to how you think that might look going forward. I don't know that we don't need like a firm answer today, say these are the goals that we want to have in the plan. I think we can probably have that conversation at the next meeting, but just sort of get the wheels turning.
Well, I see some hands up, so Ms. Carter?
Just really quick feedback. I know we have a lot, but I like the subgroup personally. I really like to ensure that all of our subgroups, whatever the goals we're setting, because we need to make sure we're allowing that for every one of our students. And to me, it's way different than just saying all students, all the subgroups. I'm sorry, I'm repeating, but.
And Ms. Carter, can we ask just a question for
Yes.
clarity? For that, we would be thinking that could be very well aligned with the focus group around literacies, knowledge, and skills. Is that what you're thinking as well? A goal around subgroups? If it fits
Yes.
appropriately there?
That's fine,
Okay.
yes.
Ms. Cash?
Well, one time I know the board had years and years ago the third grade reading as a goal, and I still like having breaks of intervention early on, like we said here. So I do want goals based on K-3 and places like that, because by the time we get to graduation, we haven't attained some goals that we need to get to graduation.
Dr. Martin?
Thank you. In the last strategic plan, I know I was an outlier. I was the vote that did not like the 95% for two reasons. One is it created such a focus on graduation rate, which primarily became a focus for high schools, and left a lot of the rest of the school system wondering, hey, where do I fit in that goal? So in going forward, I would love us to be very intentional that whatever our goals are, everybody can sort of find, here's where I fit in that goal. And this is almost where I would welcome maybe a briefer thought exchange type thing where our staff would help weigh in on what would that goal be. Because we did hear from several staff, or at least I did, that I don't necessarily see my place in the graduation rate. So what would some of these other goals look like? The other thing that, and again, it was a subject of a fair amount of discussion before, but I worry about some of these numerical things, right? Because I can get a graduation rate any way I want to. We can just decide you get a walk across the stage. And some of the other quality measures behind it we talked about, but of course we never really were able to put a thumbnail into what those quality measures were. And we even had those quality measures being at 95%, and we're a long ways from that. And so the numbers became kind of an unrealistic kind of thing. So I'd love for us to find the balance between the stress, the stretch, the challenge, and just a number which became, I mean, we knew, or at least anybody who's looked at actual data knew that 95% wasn't going to happen because it just populations don't work that way. That doesn't mean anything bad. It just populations don't work that way. So I'd love us, if numbers are there, for them to be realistic, but I'd rather have us get at the substance that challenge and stretch us than have it just be a simplistic target.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Waters.
I really applaud the work that you've done. I love the 3 groupings here. And I just want to echo with Ms. Carter's statement about the subgroups. I think that really reaffirms our commitment to equity and closing the achievement gap. So that's something that I personally find important, and I'm glad that is on your radar to look at it from that perspective. So thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Kushner.
Thank you. And I would agree, Ms. Waters, Ms. Carter, about looking at subgroups. Are we ready as a board to truly delve into the racial gaps that we have in our district about our more vulnerable children, the children we've seen targeted in some of the culture wars of our LGBTQ students? I don't know if that's technically a subgroup, but are we ready for that conversation, particularly around racial equity in Wake County?
Ms. Johnson-Hustler.
I don't have an answer for your question, Ms. Kushner, but I would echo the sentiments of asking ourselves and our community that question, and thank you for bringing up subgroups, as well as the gap in equity. And I think one of the things I'll add to Ms. Kushner's point around are we ready for the conversation is the complexities of those subgroups, right? There's resource gaps that we know that our kids from many of our marginalized communities come to school with far less resources, access to information before they come to our school that impacts their trajectory, which is where we see the achievement gap, the inequity gaps. And then there are also kids who come to us very ready, and because they identify as a marginalized community, then that changes the trajectory even when they came to us very ready for our school. So I think for me, part of that complexity and the gap in the inequity gap has to be looked at from so many different points for each different child, rather than, unfortunately, what adults tend to do is say, okay, this kindergartner came to us not ready, so we are going to look at these resources for the kid, versus that same kid could be a kid of color who now is in the 8th grade who identifies as LGBTQ. That pathway and trajectory is still just as important, but the resources are now different. And so it is going to require adults to be just as much engaged at every level around the ways that inequity impacts our children at different stages of their lives, and not reading, 3rd grade reading is a point that we will always pay attention to, but by 8th grade, that might not be the point that we are still looking at. It may be compounded with behavioral and mental health issues that causes the change in a student's outcomes. So that's the part I would add to are we ready, because I think it's really complex, and we've been looking at achievement gaps and racial inequity in a very siloed way when it's far more complicated now. And it probably always has been, but we at least have the language and context to talk about it.
And I do like the looking at elementary issues, middle school issues, high school issues. I do think to Ms. Cash's point, that's an important way for us to build, but I mean, it's going to be a very holistic way of looking at the school system.
Well, I do think if we're going to do that, though, we need to commit some funding to pre-K and to cradle to kindergarten, because by kindergarten, we're not going to change that as much as we'd like to. So I would love to have us resource pre-K.
I think my initial thoughts on this are totally in agreement in making sure that we are looking at subgroups, not just individualistically, but also holistically, especially given our core belief number 2 in wanting to eliminate predictability based on status. I like the idea of tracking elementary, middle, high school. I don't know if that gets broken down between primary and intermediate grades as well, and if there's different benchmarks that we can look at. I know there's already pieces in place that we look at there. I know we talk about college and career readiness, but sometimes students leave us because they're ready to go early. So do we add those students in, whether they choose to leave us because they're ready to just get their GED and go on. Right. And then, looking at internships for our high schools, I'm curious, how do we look at success for our 4 Cs and problem solving, communication, adaptability, and then behavioral health? I'd be curious to know what that looks like. Is it a reduction in suspensions? Is it a reduction in short-term suspensions and referrals? And certainly, as we're talking about suspensions, making sure we're cognizant of subgroups in that area is important as well.
Thank you for all that feedback. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, I just had one other point, and that was that between the one long-term goal and multiple goals, I mean, I think you're hearing a lot of consensus around multiple goals. I think you need to be somewhat limited. You can't have like 40 in each one. But this also would address, this same approach would address like a point Dr. Martin was making, which is we have strategic priorities for student outcomes, but then if we also had strategic priorities for staff development or strategic priorities for operational outcomes, they could also then have those key priorities, key long-term goals for each of those as well. So it seems like something you could apply across any goal, student outcomes or others.
Thank you.
Okay. Which is a good segue.
Ms. Matthew, do you want to get this done before we go forward?
Yes, I do.
We were all watching you write and waiting for you to see me. Ms. Mahaffey. That's okay. Me and Ms. Cash just talked about some of us are super rule followers sometimes, sometimes not. But I want to add to that point, which I didn't say earlier, but should. And I said the word laundry list, which was not following the rules while Mr. Haggerty was talking, because I don't think we should have a laundry list, because what happened last year is you could have polled any board member at any time, and we did not have any idea of the millions of things that you all had under each of these core beliefs. Like, there was no way as a board member I could have ever tried to recall what we did beyond what was on our website. I think that's a disservice to a strategic plan when your board, staff, and students aren't able to really be able to say, this is how this plan relates to me personally. So while I, again, echo the need to have these goals under there, I would caution us from creating such a complex educator way of handling things that doesn't really speak to our intended audience, which is those of us who are not educators. And so that, and I'll say that until we finish this, because that was, I think, for me, the biggest fault last time is nobody really knew what you all were doing, but you all were working so hard. And every time you came to us, I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing for us. And so I don't know how you do that, right? I'm asking you to do the impossible. I acknowledge I'm asking you to do the impossible, but I do think it's important that our school community as a whole see this as a working blueprint for everyone in our school community.
Well, I want to thank you for recognizing that and acknowledging that, because I think as a district, who we are, we like to do everything, and we want to do it now to impact our students. And one of the lessons that we did upon reflecting on the last plan, when we were talking with our school-based staff in particular about, okay, in implementing that plan, what did we learn? What could we improve upon? And one of the things that was clearly stated is that we need to have very targeted, streamlined efforts around anything we do so we can put some depth to it and make progress in it. If we're too stretched, we really can't make the movement that we need on any one of them. We can just touch it, but we need to have something that's very targeted that we can actually make some movement and some depth on. So for those school-based staff who's hearing you say that, probably would applaud and appreciate, because it's exactly what we heard. And so we've been trying to be very intentional and try to be careful that how far stretched we go with the priority focus areas. That's why we were trying to get it to at least 3 or 4 if we could, based on the input. And the same would be true to our overarching goals that guide that. With action steps underneath it that may change from year to year based on the progress we're making, but we're targeted very much on what we want to achieve by a certain end period with regard to achievement, behavioral health, or the 4 Cs. So thank you for that. So we are hearing there's some interest in probably long-term goals around the priority areas. Can I just ask before we leave very quickly, is there interest around an overarching goal? Do you want to keep like this graduation goal, or whether you have it reframed in some other way with these individual goals leading up to it?
We would have singular mission. I'm sorry. raise my hand.
Yeah.
We have a singular vision, we have a singular mission. I think maybe that could be our audacious views, that those singular statements help if we need like an elevator speech of sorts of what is our strategic plan. So do y'all think that suffices instead of having an audacious singular goal, would be my question.
I mean, yeah, I think that's fine, and I think, having a goal to work towards for graduation is an aspirational goal, but I don't know that it needs to be the goal, because if we don't, as Ms. Cash has said, if we don't hit those goals that we have earlier on for these students, it makes that end goal, right?
Right,
We all
right.
hope that all of our students will graduate and be college and career ready, but if we don't meet those other goals, it's harder to reach that last one.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll take this input and see what it looks like as it shapes out and inform, and if we feel like that might be missing, then we still need it, we can always revisit it and see how it might layer on the goals that we write for the individual areas of the priority focus areas. Okay? All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I am going to take us back to slide 13 and talk a little bit about the essential conditions that you see there. And you all had started to have this conversation, so I'm going to unpack it a little bit and then ask for some discussion around it. So we know that to achieve student outcomes, certain conditions or categories of conditions must be in place for what the adults do. And so we are conceptualizing these categories of conditions as essential conditions, and this might include staff, facilities, funding, curriculum, professional learning, technology, et cetera, things that are in place in order to achieve student outcomes that have been prioritized. So as we have this discussion around essential conditions, it's important to frame that many of these essential conditions are already in place. It's not that they are not in place, but that we want to consider what can we intentionally focus on within these essential conditions to get to the strategic priorities for student outcomes. And so if we look at slide 14, we're showing you some categories of essential outcomes that would help us to get to the 3 strategic priorities for student outcomes. And we have to have attention dedicated to what we've drafted around these essential conditions. High quality workforce, equity focused practices, high quality instructional core for all content areas, effective operations, services and facilities, and family and community engagement. So if we think about these, if these essential conditions are not in place, then it would be really difficult to move the needle to get towards the 3 outcomes that have been stated. So, for example, if there are not enough high-quality staff, or if facilities are inadequate, or if curriculum is misaligned with standards, technology is outdated, so on and so forth, it would be really difficult to get to the student outcomes and the success measures that we would outline. Additionally, these essential outcomes or these essential conditions also align to the mission, vision, and core beliefs that have been identified and stated, but also to the NC STAR indicators that schools use to select and choose and write their school improvement plan. So there's alignment from the school level, the district level, with these conditions that help move the needle towards the strategic priorities for student outcomes.
You can interrupt for just a second, Patricia. It has been received very well by schools, principals, and area superintendents who have gotten a chance to look at these essential outcomes, that there's good alignment with their school improvement planning processes and goals, because it creates kind of that bridge that we were talking about from up here to what happens in a school. So just want to mention that.
And as Dr. Moore just mentioned, that vertical alignment is really important so that folks can see themselves in this plan throughout the process. So what we are asking you to spend just a few minutes on is 2 questions for discussion. So one, looking at the 5 essential conditions or the categories of conditions, are these the major categories that would help us to achieve the goals around the strategic priorities for student outcomes? So that's the first question. Are these 5 categories the right categories? And then secondarily, if these essential conditions do resonate with you, what are the specific layers or topics that you would like to draw attention to? And you all have already mentioned staff development, funding for pre-K, reduction in suspensions. You've talked about staff. You've already mentioned some of those things as well. So in the few moments that we have remaining, do these conditions resonate? Are they the right set? And then are there any critical areas under any of these conditions that you would like to highlight today?
Dr. Martin.
So I do really like the list. And as I went back and looked at it a couple of times, I think my reflection is more maybe what do we mean by some of the different aspects, and we've talked about this before. A high-quality workforce can mean a lot of things. From a management perspective, a high-quality workforce is one who does what they're told. From, I would say, the best educational perspective, the high-quality workforce is the workforce that has trust and inspires. Superintendent Moore knew exactly what I was going to say.
I'm just saying I must be an educator because I didn't think that.
Well, but it depends. We see both, and so it so depends what it means. And likewise, the other one that really hit me is the high quality instructional core for all content areas. We have lots of discussions around high quality curriculum and so on and so forth, and frankly, I want a high-quality curriculum, but a curriculum itself can be dead and boring if it doesn't come to life. And so what I was missing is the opportunity creation, the inspire. I mean, the outcome that I kind of want is for students to be able to find a passion and an interest, because if a student develops a passion and an interest, they're going to want to learn. So I see all those things potentially embedded in each of these essentials, but I think that's my reflection is it's sort of in the fleshing out. What do we mean by each of these? But at the end of the day, the more we see our students who love to learn, who are inspired, who are given opportunities to do things and see things that they never would have otherwise done, right? I mean, if it were not for the school system, my children would not be in the careers that they are because I didn't have that experience to expose them to things, right? So that's the inspire, the opportunity, right? You all have heard me talk about this over and over again, and I will continue to talk about this because getting that life, getting that spark, to me is equally important to it is part of the definition of high quality, but it doesn't always fit in definitions of high quality when it comes to curriculum. So that's my reflection. But I like the idea. I like the set of ideas.
Ms. Carter.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, so I know we're pressed for time, but I'll just say the first time I looked at this, the first thing that kind of stood out to me, and I know there's always, what goes at the bottom, but to see family and community engagement at the bottom, to me was concerning because I feel like I'm not going to argue with, what position and everything, but to me it was just concerning because I feel like that is those should be key partners with us and our staff and our schools. Because if they are not key partners, the likelihood of success of students significantly declines. So for me, I guess that was just a visual, I guess, for me when I look at that and I see, I kind of cringed a little bit because I just had that concern.
Well, and I'll just say that they are in no order, and to change the order would suggest that there is an order. So, but there is no order to it. But if the board determines that there should be an order to it, that's certainly feedback that we could get. So.
We can also remove the numbers if that's given any implication.
Yeah, that would be good too.
Bullet points
that would be
are
good. Removing the
wonderful.
numbers would help.
Yeah. This is still in very
It's
draft
not
form
in any
expression,
order.
but-
I think it's actually similar to the order that the school improvement indicators are in.
Yeah.
That's how the indicators fall in terms of how they address them.
But thank you for your point.
But I understand what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
So I wasn't going to talk about it, but with these last couple, I think I will. I mean, the way I saw it and what I thought was important is that these five are like the pillars that are supporting everything else. And so you don't want to be too cyclical and say, well, we want students to be creative and inspired, and we're going to have these five things, but then we need to make sure we have creativity and inspiration undergirding it, because then, you've got a circular thing. But likewise, like family engagement and things, I think it's saying that you need the family engagement in all of this. You need family engagement in the 4 C's. You need family engagement in the literacies and the common skills, and the family involvement, the parent engagement in the behavioral health, too. So I know it's whenever you have to pick a structure, it's hard to know exactly what it's going to communicate, and maybe to 9 different people will sort of see it 9 different ways.
Different visual, maybe?
Yeah, but that's how I saw it.
I think you just gave us a great term we might choose to use. We played around with the word essential conditions. It might be better to say essential pillars. We'll look at that.
Ms. Waters.
And I really like the pillars here. And I just wondered, in addition to the high-quality workforce, since there was talk about respect and empathy and character traits that you carry outside of the workplace, if there are ways to kind of capture just being an overall productive citizen and being a contributing member of society in a way outside of the workforce, but as we capture those skills around empathy and respect in those areas was my thought.
Is your hand up, Ms. Cash? No. Okay. All right.
So we'll move to slide 16 and the way forward here. So once we have the framework outlined in green that you can see, and get the board's thumbs up about this structure where we have alignment around the essential, we're going to go ahead and call them pillars for now. The essential pillars, the strategic priorities for student outcomes, as well as the vision, mission, and core beliefs. Then we can go ahead and start to make sense of how all of these things align together. And then in the fall, school teams and central services staff can begin to develop action steps to get to the student outcomes where they see that they fit. So it's not necessarily that every school or every staff department will have to align actions to all of these essential pillars, but where they see themselves and where it's most intentional. So there is a streamlined set of actions and then outcome measures that are related to those that can be shared back with you. So this is the bigger picture of where we are in terms of the way forward. We are, again, trying to get the framework in green to a point where we can begin to think about actions, or staff can begin to think about actions and outcomes as we move forward. So again, today we looked at the core beliefs and that additional core belief number 7. We've talked about the strategic priorities for student outcomes and that there will be some long-term goals associated with that, as well as the essential conditions. And we'll pick back up this conversation as well, again, looking to come to some consensus on the things that we put up for discussion today, the next time that we are together. And Dr. Gardner, I will turn it back over to you.
Well, again, thank you so much for your input and feedback that you have given upon review of what we've shared with you today. It has been great, as always. And as Frederica has outlined, our next step, we hope to engage with you in the next board meeting in June, is to take what you have shared with us today, incorporate it into this draft again, bring it back to you, see if you can reach pretty much agreement with a thumbs up going forward. At the end of June, we would like to have at least all that's in the green kind of set as a framework so that we can begin to socialize with our year-round schools that open in July and start doing work in the fall. probably the first big opportunity with our summer leadership conference with school-based staff in the morning, starting to write action steps, and our central services in the afternoon, starting to write action steps as well around these areas. And I think the structure that is beginning to evolve allows everybody in this district to see him or herself and how they would be connected in this work. And the other thing I think it lends itself is to really have some outcomes attached to it so that we can hold ourselves accountable, but also more importantly, we can just monitor the progress we're making and modify and adjust as we need and or advance the work that we have. As well as we're trying to structure it so that it's aligned throughout the district with school improvement at schools, even some type of district school improvement plan for us, as well as decisions we make about funding when we develop our budget. This could be a North Star for how you make budget decisions and building a budget that makes sure that we have alignment with resources and what we're doing within building the budget. So we're very excited about the opportunity this lends itself. And again, thank you for all the input. We look forward to coming back to you next time.
Great, thank you very much. Next up, we have our summer learning update. Welcome. I know we've got some few programs that we're familiar with, but we'll be learning about what's going on this summer. So thank you for being here.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair Mahaffey and Superintendent Moore. It's great to be here this afternoon. We know the agenda is full with lots of items on the docket today, but we do appreciate the opportunity to have a few minutes to share an update with you on 2022 Wake County Public School System summer learning plans, which will include information on Read to Achieve, high school credit recovery, and also the CTE Career Accelerator Program. The presentation will also include a timeline of important dates for each program, as well as additional information for parent and community awareness. And as the slides come up here, we go to slide 2 here. I've got to say first, I'm going to apologize in advance because I believe slide 2 you will see 3 more times in the next few hours. But we do want to be intentional about the connections to the broader work, which each of the topics that we'll talk about today. Whether we're talking about summer learning as we are right now, strategies to engage and support AIG students, behavioral health, or even community partnerships to strengthen after-school tutoring programs, which you'll hear a little bit more about this evening. We know that it's likely that we'll have to keep working to strike the balance between addressing and also responding to immediate school needs that arise. That's not going to change with a snap of a finger. We know there's going to be ebb and flow, ups and downs, but we also know and recognize that moving forward, we have to strengthen our focus on long-term planning, as evidenced by the conversation you just engaged in, and also sustainable improvement strategies. The transition obviously has not been and will not be an always smooth and simple and seamless process. This will be a long-term, multi-year challenge, and one that in many instances will require us to rethink, as you see here on the slide, reimagine and redesign the way that teaching and learning occurs for students across the district. And to be clear, we're not going to, quote unquote, summer learn our way through an effective pandemic recovery, but we do believe it can and will be one important tool, one of many, to extend and enhance first-time teaching and learning in the classroom, which, as you just talked about, must remain our primary focus in the months and in the years ahead. So to that end, our goal with this presentation over the next few minutes is to simply share some information and details on work that is planned in 3 key areas. Again, Read to Achieve, high school credit recovery, and CTE Career Accelerator programming. You heard a little bit about the CTE work a couple of weeks ago from Ms. Honeycutt, and I know Brian will highlight some of those as well. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Sarita, who will talk a little bit more about the first of those 3 areas, which is Read to Achieve.
Good afternoon. Read to Achieve is a legislative camp literacy intervention that's offered to students in grades 2 and 3 who demonstrate difficulty with reading development. It is offered during the summer and track outs based on school calendar. Student eligibility is outlined in the law. Students in grade 2 are invited based on their end-of-the-year M-Class composite score. M-Class is the literacy universal screener and diagnostic tool that the state provides to all districts and to all students in grades K through 3. Students in grade 3 who are not proficient on the end-of-grade test in English Language Arts and who have not met a good cause exemption are also invited to participate as well. Students who accept the invitation to attend camp will receive 10 to 12 days of intensive literacy instruction. Camp will run from June to September, depending on which calendar the student follows. Student enrollment is expected to exceed 4,000. 290 teachers and 126 instructional assistants are needed to staff the 61 school sites. Traditional schools will combine their students for the camp experience. Multi-track year-round, modified, and single-track schools, for the most part, will host their own students at their own sites. There are a few exceptions. In addition to the 416 instructional staff needed for the camp, we will employ 38 leads to run the daily operations of the camp sites that occur at the traditional single-track year-round and modified school calendars. Transportation and meal services will be provided to students and families. Finally, Wake County Public Schools is excited to partner the Read to Achieve Camp with the YMCA Power Scholars programs for students at Bug and Poe Elementary Schools. This partnership will offer an extended experience for students and families. It will include a 5-week program with weekly field trips as extensions. Our Wake County teachers will provide the instruction with the YMCA staff, providing support with social emotional learning, enrichment activities such as art, music, outdoor education, and active games. We hope to expand this pilot program to other schools in the future. Next, Brian will talk to you about high school credit recovery.
Well, good afternoon. I am happy to share with you a little bit about our high school credit recovery program for this summer. As you know, the credit recovery program has been around for a number of years and has happened annually. Just to level set, credit recovery is an opportunity for our high school students who may have lost credits over the course of the school year and didn't earn those credits to engage in a process to reclaim them over the course of the summer. The priority in doing this is to provide students with an opportunity to engage in work that allows them to stay on target for promotion, on target for graduation, or on target for other goals they may have with their 4-year graduation plan. One of the true pluses and strengths of the credit recovery program is that it honors and acknowledges that our students are bringing a lot to the table. They may have struggled in a course, but they do have learning and they do have strength and mastery that they're bringing to the table for a specific course. And so students will pre-assess and only engage in those modules of learning that they need in order to show mastery for the course and gain credit. For context, during this past summer, our students were able to earn just short of 4,000 credits back, and these credits helped us to provide 134 additional students with the opportunity to walk across the stage and graduate over those summer months. As we look to this coming summer and as we keep focus on Mr. Cook's comments about reinventing and re-engaging our processes to meet the needs of students, we are excited that we've been able to resource high schools this summer to accommodate more students that may need to engage or want to engage in the credit recovery program. Historically, there's been a limited number of seats, and so we've been able to work with high schools to modify the programs and provide access to a greater number of students based on the need at the school. For students and parents who are wondering how to engage in this program, I strongly recommend that they start with their school counselor. While credit recovery is a wonderful option, it is not always the best option for all students, and we really want to strongly encourage students and families to engage in that academic counseling process to be sure they know all options that are available to them in order to stay on their path towards promotion and graduation. Last, while you've heard about the CTE Accelerator Program several times in the last few months, I do want to mention it to you today. We are excited about these partnerships with several of our community partners and the things that we're able to do. These programs will allow students to seek opportunities that they may not have been able to experience due to the pandemic, to continue seeking that opportunity that, as Dr. Martin mentioned earlier, may provide that spark and that opportunity to dig in and learn something new, be hands-on, and do those things that really may bring that classroom learning back to life and inspire that next learning that they want to have. Hats off to Joanne Honeycutt and the CTE team for their work to pull this off. But also hats off to our community partners, such as the Wake Ed Partnership, who have worked a lot in order to build the structures and help us to make this truly a community effort this summer, which as of June the 1st, we had 685 students who were enrolled and excited to be participating. And our schools have made a priority of making sure that this is a diverse group of students and that we're reaching as many different parts of our school community as we possibly can to make sure that students are aware of the opportunity. Last on this particular program, I will let you know we will solicit feedback from students, teachers, community partners, and other stakeholders as the programs this summer come to a close. But we do anticipate that opportunities like this will become part of our new normal during the summer. And we'll continue to engage with community partners to be sure that we can offer opportunities like this. Again, to Mr. Cook's slide at the beginning, to reinvent and re-engage and offer supports that meet the needs of our students. So we look forward to this in future summers as well. And finally, to wrap up, we want to share some logistics with you and with our community who may be listening. Read to Achieve will be operating on various calendars from June until September. The high school credit recovery on the traditional calendar will operate from July 6th to August 4th, and our early colleges and modified calendar schools will begin slightly earlier in June due to their calendar. The Career Accelerator programs will happen throughout the summer, but mostly towards the second half of July, beginning of August. And students who are enrolled in those programs are receiving direct contact from the district to let them know logistics and next steps so we can continue their excitement about that program. On the far right of the slide, you'll note there is a link to a page within the Wake County Public School external website that provides students, parents, and members of our community with more information on these programs. And with that, that concludes our presentation today on summer programs. And on behalf of the team, we welcome your feedback and questions on these exciting opportunities for our students.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. And thank you again for the flexibility of being able to present this without tornado warnings occurring around us. But seriously, thank you for the flexibility, and thank you, Chair Mahaffey, for allowing this to come to work session. I just had a quick question about the high school credit recovery. Is that the same thing as Grad Point, or are those different programs?
Yes, ma'am. It's a great question. So GradPoint is a online tool. And so we use GradPoint for credit recovery, but we also use GradPoint for objective recovery during the school year. When, for example, a student may have not shown mastery on a particular concept, then they are often able to recover some of that and support that understanding through GradPoint as well to recover that specific objective while they're still in the course.
Thank you for that. And while I understand that Read to Achieve is required by law and funded as well, specifically for that program, what type of information can we provide to families who are concerned about math, especially in elementary school? People are getting those grade 3 EOGs back, and I think folks sometimes have a little bit of a concern when they see math scores, because it's much like reading. If you don't have that fluency in these basic skills, that can be a little bit of a challenge later on down the road. What types of options do we have to at the very least provide information to families? I know this gets into a funding concern, but or partners. you know, what can we say to folks when, because I get this question a lot, especially right now, and what's the ideal answer to provide?
So while we don't have summer programming for math, we did make it a point this month to send out resources to schools that they can share with families of math activities that they can practice over the summer using like Dreambox and some of our other math resources so that kids can keep those skills and that knowledge fresh over the summer.
Students can still access their Dreambox account on their Wake ID, and they'll have their devices over the summer. Those will stay
Yes.
with them. And there are other information like Khan Academy. I mean, is that shared as well?
Are there, you said specific the resources?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, I think we can always reference and make sure we're pointing people in the direction of our district websites that are often linked, obviously, at schools as well for those resources, particularly in math. And in fact, we can send that out to this group and probably send out a message to be sure that it's something that all of our schools are just reminding parents about. And I think, you know, I think the question's a good one in a lot of ways, I think not the least of which is going back to where we draw the line in terms of what summer programming we can provide that is not in some ways potentially counterproductive, potentially, in terms of the time and the capacity and the effort that has to be put in from a school standpoint, who will be and should be busily engaged in preparing for teaching and learning for the upcoming school year. And I think, you know, we learned a lot last summer with a really comprehensive, full-scale summer learning program that was legislatively mandated. And so I think what you're seeing today is our best effort for 2022 to strike that balance. And so I think, to your point, we absolutely want to be sure that we're sharing resources and supports. And I would always encourage parents and students and families to start with the teacher. I can promise you they love it when a student and a family comes to them and says, hey, I'd love to have some extra practice in math this summer. Can you point me in the direction of some resources and supports? And I think our teachers and our school-based staff are best capable of being able to do that. And so we'll certainly make sure we're providing access and links to those resources for our schools to be able to get their hands on as well.
That's very helpful. I appreciate that. And it's fascinating to me that our legislators are so keen to understanding the importance of reading, which is 100% importance. And then but at the other end, they require this financial literacy course. But what helps can they do to, again, to get those building blocks secure in our students?
Careful what you ask for.
No. My point being, let me. Thank you. I'm jumping from too many ponds here. My point being, it would be wonderful if they had discussions with educators who are in the classrooms every day to see what supports would really be the best use of funding for them. Thank you.
More funding, not reallocated funding. Ms. Cash.
So I have two questions. First one is the high school counselors. Do they have the time to figure out the number of students because they seem so busy at the end of the year and right now overwhelmed? Are we expecting them to figure out which kids need to make up credits or help the child?
So it's a great question. I would certainly agree that the end of the year in particular is a very busy time for our high school counselors. But I would also say that the work of keeping students on track to their promotion graduation goals, the work of keeping track of where they're at on the road to graduation would extend far beyond the counselor to the intervention coordinator, to, I would say, the assistant principals and principal who are working with students and having those conversations all along the road of where we at. So it is a very, very rare thing, I think, that we suddenly get to the end of the semester and suddenly a student is not passing. Usually there's a road that leads up to that and an opportunity both for intervention to try to prevent that not gaining credit for the course, but then you ultimately get to the end and they may not receive credit. So I think that, yes, I agree. They have a lot on their plate at the end, but I think they have a team around them, and I think it's a conversation that is really ongoing throughout the road up to the end of the year.
Okay, I appreciate that. And the second question was our learning program last year. I think I've asked this, and I probably got an answer and just missed that. Well, how did we monitor the progress the students made, and did we? You know what I'm going to say. Mr. Cook's going to answer me.
So your question from a couple of months ago is ringing in my ears. So a couple of things. There is, and we'll go back and re-reference this. We provided an update back, I think, in September with some initial data points around M-class data and some other things that showed a little bit of movements for some kids over the course of that 6-week program. I think and so we'll share that with you all for some quick reference. I think the bigger data analysis, and we've talked a little bit with data research and accountability on this, will come, Ms. Cash, with what happens with outcomes right now in terms of where students progressed over the course of this school year. And obviously, those results and those returns are just now coming in. And so, we were able to maybe take a brief snapshot, at least initially, back in September. But that doesn't really provide us with the picture that, I think, to your question, we need to be looking for, which is, okay, so we had a little bit of a bump for some kids on these measures over 6 weeks as of August of last year. More importantly, right, where are kids now and how have they made up potentially some ground over the course of 21-22? So I think we would expect to kind of dig another layer deeper to see which kid, and I think what you're talking about is kind of cross-referencing the multiple thousands of kids that participated last summer, and then take a look at what are their EOG and EOC outcomes, what are their course grades, what are their promotion and retention rates, and can we quantify that in some way to maybe inform decision-making even going into 2023, right, recognizing that whatever summer learning looks like right now, it may need to look a little different for 2023.
Oh, that's a great answer. Yeah, it makes total sense to me, and cross-referencing back to those kids, that makes sense to EOG now. Thanks.
Ms. Waters.
Thank you for this presentation. I just had a couple of questions on Read to Achieve. Of the 4,000 projected students, I was wondering, in terms of the number of students who were qualified for the program, what does that percent look like? And then also in terms of the teachers that are hired, are there special education teachers included in this program to service those students who might need those resources?
So right now, we only have data for modified calendar schools, and we are coming in at a 71% acceptance rate. So of all the families that we accept, we've invited 71% have accepted the invitation and plan to attend camp. That's higher than what we've seen in previous years. It usually ranges from 50 to 55%. So if modified is any indicator of what the trend will be across the district, we're very excited about that. As far as special education teachers, we won't be providing special education services, like they won't be working to teach them goals on the IEP, but special education teachers have filled out an application to be a Read to Achieve teacher, and they can do that. But the curriculum is a regular ed curriculum, but any special education, any students with the IEPs that attend will receive their accommodations and modifications during camp.
A quick question, and Ms. Smith, as we go on, if you could give us an update at some, whether it's emailed, on that acceptance rate, because that is exciting, and because I think it had been around a little over 50% previously, so to jump up to 70 is shows that word's getting around that those are great programs. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so very much. And we look forward to hearing more information about these programs and, as Ms. Kushner said, acceptance rates and successes. And thank you, Mr. Pittman. I don't know if we'll see you at our next meeting.
Thanks for reminding me.
Thank you.
Yes, and Mr. Cook, you're staying with us to talk about our Aig Plan. And this is the one that we give to the state every year?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Or every 3 years? and welcome Ms. Burl Roberts. Yeah, I heard things were, I'd like that this is not as exciting as a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it was. I don't know what happened to it.
Checking your, thank you.
This thing is, the green light is on, just so you'll know.
It sure is now.
So anyway, it is important, I think, for us to recognize that we do feel a sense of urgency. We feel it with AIG. We feel it with credit recovery. We feel it with literacy instruction. But we also want to be cautious about jumping immediately into recovery mode without being really clear about the data and what it's telling us our true needs are. And so I think it's important that whether we're talking about any of the topics that we're discussing and reviewing today, it's important to kind of find that balance between moving forward at a pace that is reflective of urgency, but also at the same time that is still strategic and data-centered, so that we don't get ahead of ourselves and end up having to backtrack and perhaps expend money, time, energy in areas that we may find years from now weren't as effective as they could have been had we been a little bit more strategic on the front end. So to that end, as we shared back in November, as part of our initial work to reimagine and reinvent how services and supports are provided to AIG students, we have partnered with Hanover Research Group to assist us in conducting a deeper review and evaluation of several key aspects of our district's AIG programming. Hanover Research is a custom research firm dedicated to meet the research needs of U.S. educational institutions, and over the last decade, they've evolved to become a leading and recognized global information services and research firm. In Wake County, there are 3 components of this work, which you may recall we shared back in the winter, that we've been engaged in with them through the winter into the spring, and it's ongoing. Those components include a comprehensive stakeholder survey, which includes teachers, students, and parents. Also a peer district benchmark comparison, which we believe will help us to analyze things like policy alignment trends, best practices, and district program accountability measures, among others. And finally, and perhaps most critically, there's also an advisory project component that assists with data analysis, program planning, and implementation strategies moving forward. And then here on the next slide is an overview of the key questions that you may recall are driving this research project. Things like what impact, if any, have programs had on academic and or behavioral outcomes? To what extent do students in the district have equitable access to various forms of AIG programming? And how is the AIG program implemented effectively across the district? And at this point, just to kind of update you, the initial work of the first 2 phases of the Hanover work, which includes the stakeholder survey and the peer district comparison, has largely been completed. And while we have been able to review and incorporate some of the preliminary feedback into the revised local plan that's in front of you today, the real work of data analysis and evaluation will occur in the 3rd phase over the next couple of months. And as we'll share when we get to the next steps at the very end of the presentation, we will be back to this board prior to budget development season in the fall with what we expect to be a full overview and analysis of the full and final Hanover report, which will likely include any specific recommendations for an expanded multi-year business case and potentially any additional adjustments we may wish to make to the 3-year local plan, which, by the way, by design, can be revised at any time during the course of that 3-year period. So we wanted to make clear that the plan that we have today, I think probably more so than in pre-pandemic circumstances, is likely to need some revision and updating as, again, we learn more and can be more strategic and make adjustments with our strategies as we've got better data to drive us in the directions that we know we need to go. And Hanover is helping with that effort. So with that quick context and backdrop, I'm going to turn it over to Lakeisha, who will take us through the core of the presentation and discussion.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This first part of the presentation, we're going to go through the 2019-22 AIG plan. As Drew mentioned, we were not able to focus on all aspects of our plan, but we really did have a really great plan and going to make sure that we expound upon that in our 22-25 plan. So the 2019-22 AIG plan was the opportunity to reimagine how we look at the academic and intellectually gifted program in Wake County. As a collective cross-collaborative team, we were able to develop a plan that is more in line with our values. In the 2019-22 plan, we were able to dismantle gateways to make way for gifted identification opportunities. This reframing removed the stigma of gatekeeping and allowed for a new way of looking at how students are identified. In 2019-2022, we made the brave steps at analyzing our plan to make way for more equitable practices. In this step, we introduced the portfolio process, which allowed schools to use multiple data points to determine the needs of students and opposed to one data point. This has allowed schools flexibility to look at twice exceptional students, students that speak a second language, as well as students of color and truly understand their gifted potential. At our May 2021 Student Achievement Committee, we were able to highlight 2 schools who were getting great success through the use of the portfolio process. In this plan, we also introduced talent development. Talent development is an opportunity for high-achieving students to develop gifted characteristics. Through the process of data collection and analysis, intentional efforts are created to develop and cultivate the potential in high-performing students whose strengths are not yet tapped or readily observable. Talent development efforts produce strength-based learning opportunities where teachers can observe and collect data for the purpose of gifted identification. In the 2019-22 plan, we were able to introduce the AIG Equity Collaborative Team. This collaborative team is comprised of various stakeholders outside of AIG that not only helped create our current plan and helped refine our draft 22-25 plan, they are also responsible for supporting the AIG plan to help foster a culture of high expectations and academic growth that increase achievements in K-12 AIG identified students, intentionally increases participation of underrepresented students, and ensures access to challenging, innovative, and rigorous curriculum. In an effort to identify high-achieving students in low-performing areas, we partnered with DRNA and Student Assignment to create a local norming process. In this local norming process, we were able to compare students to their like peers to analyze that data compared to other students in Wake County Public Schools. Student Assignment was able to develop an algorithm to determine where a student lives in a comparative neighborhood. The Office of Student Assignment uses a geographic information system program to create neighborhood maps for students. This program generates a list of students in the same grade that took the same test to produce a neighborhood that consists of a 1-mile radius. Once these neighborhoods were created, the program runs testing data and distributes these scores in a way to produce percentile ranks that compare, order, and rank students as high performers. This process allowed us to centrally provide individual lists to schools, which in turn allowed school teams to analyze data of students they may have not typically looked at. And lastly, we were able to make sure AIG teachers were supported in the proper methodology to support the unique academic needs of students through their regular professional learning and one-on-one coaching. This year, our AIG teachers completed a 4-part professional learning series through Duke that helped them develop learning opportunities for the students they serve. The AIG teachers explored levels of thinking as well as depth and complexity. They also received training from Advanced Learning Service Team on how to use depth of knowledge to increase the rigor of content standards. AIG teachers also explored learning contracts, open-ended problem solving, and dinner menus as a way to promote academic choice for our students. Throughout the year, we've also had a chance to learn about social and emotional needs of our gifted learners. We did this through 3 different presentations. First, we learned about the basics of CASEL standards for social and emotional learning. We also dove into the unique characteristics of gifted learners, such as peer relationships and emotional intensity. We then examined perfectionism, both healthy and unhealthy, and lastly, helped teachers explore behavioral health data and how to use this to support the social and emotional needs of our gifted students. You can go to the next slide. So in that, we did have a lot of successes, but in that we also noticed that there were some things that we still need to work on. So despite the effects of the pandemic, we have been able to keep the focus on education a priority for our gifted learners. But we still desire to bolster that experience to truly tap into the potential of gifted learners. In this plan, we introduced talent development, which gave us the process of developing gifts and talents of students who demonstrated accelerated achievement. But in that, we have learned that we need to be more concise about the way we monitor the progress of students, as well as target their strengths for further development. And since the start of using the portfolio process, we were able to identify many students using this process, which is the ability to look at multiple data points in order to make a determination. But we still desire to make our identification process to be more equitable and more inclusive. This involves giving our teachers the tool to be true talent scouts. Now, based on multiple data points, as well as the preliminary data from Hanover that was discussed from Drew, we compiled a list of potential areas of focus. So on the screen, you'll see those areas of focus. One is communication. Our desire is to enhance and maintain accurate communication of the AIG program with students and parents via email. We want to ensure parents and students understand the identification process and academic acceleration opportunities. And also, we want to continue to provide resources that staff members want to enhance the equity of the program, including meeting the needs of diverse gifted learners, identifying giftedness in underrepresented populations, and differentiation strategies. And further explore the inconsistencies in the perceptions of the AIG services between the stakeholders. The AEC team was able to review the data set and the feedback that was given, and it was used to develop our preliminary 22-25 AIG draft plan. So as we moved into our 22-25 draft plan, on the screen you'll see the 6 program standards. And I won't read through each one of them, but they outline each component of our plan and each area that by the state we must make sure that our plan meets. In Standard 1, which focuses on student identification practices, we would like to highlight 3 key aspects from our proposed plan. The first aspect is our referral process. So parents, teachers, students, and other stakeholders may refer a student for gifted identification at any point in a student's educational career. This part of the plan outlines the referral processes for K-3, 4-8, and our 9-12 students. The next portion is universal screening. And universal screening, we are usually doing that for our 3rd graders that occur in the fall. And finally, for identification, this section of the plan outlines multiple ways giftedness is demonstrated, which is called gifted identification opportunities. In Standard 2, focuses on comprehensive programming. So we would like to highlight 3 aspects within our proposed plan. The first is differentiation. This part of the plan distinguishes between what differentiation service groups look like at various levels of service. So that's for our IG students, our AIG students, or our AG students. Provides greater detail about supports for gifted learners. And finally, this section we focus on talent development as a way to broaden access. Next, we want to talk a little bit about the social-emotional learning. So in this part of the plan, it outlines our county's practices and actions to ensure we are meeting the unique social-emotional needs of our gifted learners. And lastly, thinking about transition. So this section outlines how we provide supports for students transitioning from elementary to middle school and from middle school to high school. For Standard 3 of our plan focuses on differentiated curriculum. So we would like to highlight 3 aspects in our proposed plan. The first is instructional practices. In this section of the plan, we outline the district expectations around differentiation opportunities to enrich, extend, and accelerate academic supports. We also discuss collaborations with others to ensure we are meeting the needs of our twice exceptional children, and also the portion of the plan we discuss critical thinking opportunities that will be available to students at the middle school level. Next is evidence-based resources. So provide supplemental resources to schools that embed evidence-based practices to aid in building critical thinking skills of gifted learners. And lastly, differentiated educational plan, or DEPs. So the DEP ensures that each student has a differentiated plan that reflects the services provided. Now, at this time, I would like to invite Jennifer and Kelly from Mills Park Middle School, who will share some of their practices that align to standards 1 through 3.
Make sure the green light's on.
Oh, yeah, make sure.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Barber, and this is my colleague, Jennifer Walski. We are the AIG teachers at Mills Park Middle, located in Northwest Wake. Our school has an enrollment of 1,596 students. 695 of our students are identified as AIG. Jen and myself stepped out of the classroom at Mills Park into our current roles in the fall of 2020. We are excited to share some highlights of our school's program with you today.
In regards to Standard 1 student identification, the portfolio process has provided us with a more complete picture of a student's academic abilities because we evaluate student work, not just test scores. This enables us to see the whole child and create a more equitable identification process. One area of opportunity is for us to identify students in our school's underrepresented demographics. Next year, we will conduct observations in core classes to seek giftedness.
In regards to Standard 2, comprehensive programming, we have prioritized academic intervention for our AIG students. We begin the year gathering data from multiple sources from the previous year. We create watch lists based on the data and continue to monitor student progress through grade level kid chat meetings, team meetings, and quarterly grade reviews. We develop individualized plans for any struggling AIG student and typically work with them one-on-one to provide targeted support. Additionally, we seek opportunities to support core teachers. For example, teachers identified Math 6 Plus and Math 7 Plus students who continue to struggle due to multiple factors, especially gaps from the pandemic. I worked with these students in small groups throughout second semester to bridge those gaps. In order to provide enrichment to as many of our AIG students as we could, we held weekly meetings during our school's flex time. We've had great success supporting our students with competitions we exposed them to, including the McIntyre Challenge, Wake Writes Together, and the Future Smart Scholarship Contest. Additionally, through the business partnerships we've developed over the past 2 years, we've been able to provide our students with enrichment opportunities by virtually hosting career experts. Next year, we will partner with our librarians to offer more extensive programming during flex time, such as hands-on experiences and a lecture series. In addition, next year our school is adopting a club day schedule. This schedule will provide us with more time to reach our AIG students. Furthermore, we will work with our CDC teacher to develop new and grow existing business partnerships.
In regards to Standard 3, differentiated curriculum and instruction, over the last 2 years, I have designed differentiated units for 6th grade ELA Module 3, which incorporated STEM and the 4 Cs. This year, students learned about biomimicry inspired by ocean animals and then went through the biomimicry design process themselves. Going forward, we're excited about the opportunity to reach AIG students through our new public speaking and debate elective. I will partner with the elective teacher to deliver targeted lessons to identified students. In addition, Kelly and I are both STEMworks scholars. With the support of the Keenan Fellows program and our business partners, we will implement our PBL projects in 6th grade ELA and 8th grade math next year. In closing, we are proud of the work we have accomplished since stepping into this role 2 years ago, and we know with the appropriate resources, there is so much more we can do to serve our students. We truly appreciate your time this afternoon and your invested interest in Wake County's AIG program.
Thank you so much, Jennifer and Kelly. So now as we move into the final standards, Standard 4, 5, and 6. Standard 4 focuses on professional development. So in the plan, you'll see a little bit about our advisory group, which is the AAC Equity Collaborative, as well as the professional learning plan within our AIG plan, and our practices and our thoughts around certified staff. And so in that, we are looking to partner with some of our local universities to provide opportunities for our teachers to get AIG certified, as well as we're very excited about having coordinating teacher positions for our high school level AIG students in order to make sure that we continue to promote academic rigor for our 9-12 students. In Standard 5, this is our partnerships, and you'll see in this part of the plan we talk about parent involvement as well as our communication plan, and lastly you'll see a little bit about our program information. And lastly is Standard 6, which is program accountability. In this portion, we talk a little bit about how we will monitor our plan and monitor the progress of our plan, as well as the development of our multi-year budget plan, as mentioned by Drew. In this, we talk a lot about how we are going to use data to inform our needs of our AIG students, and also having the flexibility of making some changes within our plan as we see fit based on the data. So at this time, what I'd like to do is to invite another teacher up, Lisa Ashworth from Green Elementary, who will also share a little bit about how our plan impacts her programming.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mahaffey and Superintendent Moore and other members of the Wake School Board. As you know, because I have spoken here before from NCAE, I am the Green Elementary School AIG teacher. It is a Title I elementary school, as you know, in the northern area of Wake County. The school population consists of 555 students. The subgroups are 42% Black, 30% white, 12% Hispanic white, and 10% other multiracial, 4% natural Hispanic, and 2% Asian. When I started as an AIG teacher there 4 years ago, there were 21 identified 4th and 5th graders at the beginning of the school year. Of those 21 students, there were 4 students from underrepresented populations. As of today, there are currently 47 total AIG identified students, 11 5th grade students who will move on to middle school next year, 18 4th grade students, and 18 3rd grade students. Of those 47 students, 17 were identified through the portfolio that you've heard about this afternoon, and which includes data and work samples. Of the 47 identified students, 16 of them are from underrepresented populations, and of that number, 7 of the underrepresented population students were also identified through the portfolio. Also, of those 47 students, 36 of them have received enrichment from the earlier nurturing program and enrichment from kindergarten through 2nd grade. In the Standard 1 of the AIG standards, a student's identification needs to be clear, equitable, and comprehensive in order to lead towards educational services. At Green, I work with the classroom teachers, starting with kindergarten through 5th grade, to identify students who demonstrate grade level proficiency and above in ELA and math standards. I consult with teachers during their PLT times, and we examine data from M-Class, STAR Math, NC check-ins, NKT, classroom assessments, monthly problem solving, and other work samples. I also solicit teacher and parent feedback on a student's demonstration of intellectual and academic ability through the use of checklists and our gifted rating scale. I have been keeping a spreadsheet from year to year of student data in math and ELA proficiency in order to work towards identification and to have discussions with classroom teachers from year to year. In Standard 2 of the AIG standards, a school program needs to offer an array of services within the community to meet the diverse academic, intellectual, social, and emotional needs of gifted learners. My work on the Equity Collaborative team in the past few years has been very intentional in looking for specific ways to identify and motivate students from underrepresented backgrounds. By carefully examining the state AIG standards as I've worked on this collaborative, I've looked for ways to nurture and motivate all students, but especially students who fall within that population of gifted, underrepresented students. As an AIG teacher at Green, I work to meet the needs of students through collaboration and planning with classroom teachers, counselors, and other specialists. In reference to Standard 3, I work to provide challenging, rigorous, and relevant curriculum and instruction to accommodate a range of academic, intellectual, social, and emotional needs of our kindergarten through 5th grade students. I am using a wide variety of resources to extend and challenge student learning. I plan my activities and lessons very closely in coordination with the objectives that are being taught daily in the grade level classrooms. I attend PLT meetings before school, and I refer to the wonderful grade level lesson plans that are housed on Google Drive to plan my enrichment activities that provide an extension directly and challenge those students. In a typical week at Green, I provide enrichment to approximately 125 students from kindergarten through 5th grade. I pull 2 groups a week from each grade level in K2 classrooms to provide enrichment in ELA and math for 30 minutes. In 3rd through 5th grade, I pull identified and talent development students together twice a week in each area of math and ELA for a total of 60 minutes a week. In addition to those pull-out groups, I really enjoy pushing into 3rd grade classrooms once a week to provide an entire class enrichment activities for the whole classroom. In conclusion, in the last 4 years that I've worked at Green as an AIG teacher, the amount of students who have been identified in AIG has doubled, and the number of underrepresented students has tripled. I attribute that success to 5 things: my work on the Equity Collaborative team, which has helped me carry out an effective AIG enrichment program, the early K2 nurturing that I have been able to provide starting, like I said, in kindergarten, the development and use of the portfolio option for AIG identification as an alternate process of identifying students rather than through only intellectual and achievement tests, the implementation of the talent development program, and lastly, and most importantly, being able to be employed as a full-time AIG teacher in a position in a school where the number of identified students only warrants a 50% position. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and to share these results, and I'm really excited of what has been accomplished even through the pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to share your school success story, and
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Lisa. And so at this time, thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to give a broad outline of our 22-25 plan, and I'm going to turn it over to Drew Cook to go over Glows and Grows.
And I'm watching the clock like you are, so we'll do our best to kind of move through the last few slides. And I promise you, we're trying to do justice to a 60-page plus plan without just flying through everything. So we're trying to find that balance. We did want to close with talking about progress monitoring, some data points that we felt like might be relevant to as reference points for you, and also in discussions moving forward about quickly identifying, I think in some cases, where we've got lots of room for growth and improvement. And so the first slide here we'll show you is on slide 20, just a current up-to-date breakdown of AIG enrollment data in the district, which includes total enrollment and also demographic breakdowns, both in raw numbers and percentages. I can tell you if we go back several years to 2017-18, these data look very similar. And I think I can speak for everyone and say that by itself is probably a opportunity for growth, because when we're talking about closing gaps and ending disproportionality, and we've got relative stability in some of the data, then I think that's an indication that clearly we've got room for growth. We are seeing, as Lisa just shared and others have shared, individual schools that are breaking some of these trends. And I think one of the things we've got to do moving forward is identify some of our schools that are outliers in terms of what that data looks like and see what we can do to help replicate and scale some of the work that we know they're engaged in. And I know we'll be talking about some similar work even with our discipline and behavioral health data in just a few minutes. On slide 21, if we go a layer deeper to look at numbers of students being identified each year. So this is a year-by-year breakdown of the numbers of new students being identified both overall and by subgroup. A couple of things we'll point out. First, you'll see the obvious blip downward in 2021. when many students were remote for all or part of the school year and were consequently not able to take the COGAT, which is an important identification tool, which was not administered that school year. So it could be that still being able to identify 2,700 plus students in that environment, given those challenges, again, depending on if it's half empty, half full, could be considered a GLOW. Interestingly, you may note that also we saw a slight uptick that particular year, at least in terms of the total percentage identified for students of color, including Black, Hispanic, and multiracial. Obviously, we've got to see multiple years of that kind of trend to begin chipping away at some of the gaps that we see in the overall numbers. I think, so you can see some of that stability across years with some fluctuation from some subgroups from year to year, with some progress being made, and then kind of a regression even in terms of the most recent school year. So if we then go to slide 22, we take a look at a snapshot of EOG and EOC performance data. As you recall, the primary kind of goals that we're focused on are both the equity and access, which speaks to identification, but also obviously how are kids doing and what's their performance. And so we felt like it would be a good reference point to take a look at how our AIG identified students are performing compared to their AIG peers across the district. And so you'll note here math and reading EOG and EOC scores over a multi-year period for our AIG students. And I want to point out a couple of things, and I see Brad sitting over there. He wanted me to make sure I issued a couple of caveats. First and foremost, these are level 4 and 5 college and career ready numbers, not proficiency data, which is kind of our typical benchmark very often, which is a level 3. I think rightfully the bar should be higher for our AIG kids, and so we're looking here at the percentage of those kids that made a 4 or a 5 on their EOG or on their EOC. I think likewise, Brad also wanted me to make sure that we're all reminding ourselves that the 2021 data, we've got to use caution in terms of how we interpret and evaluate that. Given the fact that we had large numbers of kids that didn't sit and take the EOG or the EOC, it's very, very difficult to kind of compare this past year's data to previous years for those obvious reasons. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out. And, you know, I think the other thing, it seems like every time we talk about EOG or EOC scores, in this case an EOC, it doesn't take long to have your eyes drawn to Math 1 data. And I think, you know, whether we're talking about AIG subgroups or overall, that stands out. We were curious, so one thing that I do want to point out, and this is one of these situations where I don't want this to come off as excuse making, but it's not an apples to apples comparison between 17-18 and 18-19. I think you all know, and we've talked about before, the fact that our middle school students who sit for the EOC aren't counted anymore. They were prior. You can see the precipitous drop. The N from 17-18 to 18-19 dropped from 2,806 AIG students taking the Math 1 EOC the year before to 146. So I think it's important as we're looking contextually, we're talking about a 95% drop in participation because I think you could make the presumption that 95% of our AIG identified kids had already taken Math 1 before they got to the 9th grade. And so they're eliminated. You see a similar drop at the state level. I think when you look at the drop in the state N number, they had a precipitous drop as well, but not as significant as Wake. We talked before about the number of our kids that accelerate in middle school and what potentially some of those consequences might be for longer range outcomes for kids once they get to high school. So I wanted to bring that up. And I think this is really an and statement, right? There's some reasons behind the data that you see that stands out. And we've got to make sure that we're doing everything we can to identify why kids who are identified as AIG are not being as successful as otherwise we might expect them to be, whether they take Math 1 in 8th grade or in the 9th grade or later. You'll also note that when you look at Math 3 scores for that same cohort 2 years later, the N comes back up. Most of those kids are back in that count again. And I don't think it's coincidental that they, again, begin to outperform their peers across the state. It's the same cohort of kids when you look at that group from 2 years earlier that would have taken the Math 1 in terms of those classes. And finally, we wanted to close just with a few next steps. We will incorporate additional feedback from you all and from others over the course of the next couple weeks. We'll bring forward a finalized AIG plan for board approval at the June 21st board meeting. We will continue to progress monitor key action steps of the plan and provide regular updates for board discussion and review. And then by the fall of 2022, so just a few months down the road, our plan is to develop a comprehensive multi-year business case that we believe is aligned with our program needs and plan strategies, with implementation then beginning in full with the 23-24 fiscal year. So that's a lot of information covering a 60-page plus document. So at this time, we're happy to answer questions or provide additional information as needed.
Mr. Haggerty?
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. Cook and Ms. Sproul-Roberts for your presentation. I want to say I really appreciated how the presentation was made, because what you've done with your presentation is now you've given us a good guide for going through the 70-page document and really breaking down sort of what everything is. And I look forward to going through and seeing, what we're doing differently, what's new in the plan, versus what's a holdover from previous years in the plan. But thank you for that. A couple quick questions. The first one, Mr. Cook touched on it. Grade 3 is when we do the universal identification. For the 2021 year, we weren't able to offer the testing. Are there any plans to go back and try to make assessments of those gap year children, or are there things that teachers, instructors in higher level grades that are getting these children rising up might be doing to identify those kids?
Yes. So in that pandemic year, when we knew we didn't have the COGAT for the universal screening, we focused on those students as far as extending our Explore third grade program for them so that we didn't lose those students. When we came back into the school year, we were able to use the COGAT screening for our third and fourth graders. So any student that wasn't captured in the portfolio process, we were able to still participate in the COGAT sweep at fourth grade.
Wonderful. That's great news. I appreciate that you're able to make that extra effort to make sure we didn't lose anybody along the way. Next question. This is on Standard 3, the differentiated curriculum and instruction. This is something I hear a lot about from parents as they make magnet school choices, as they weigh one school option versus another. Parents will ask about, is it push in or pull out? Will they be getting differentiated assignments? Units like we heard about at Mills Park, where you might have a more advanced social studies unit that you're developing for the AIG children in the class versus certain kids leave the class and then go and work on something in another room. I was just curious, in terms of district policy versus school-based decisions, how those decisions are made. Do you give guidance at the district level? Is it a principal's decision, whether it's more push-in, whether it's more pull-out, or how they structure AIG at each school?
Yes, so I think the answer to all of that is yes, right? And so we do try to provide some guidance within our plan. And in that section of the plan, you'll see we tried to provide some additional guidance, so at least there's a baseline of offerings for our schools. We also don't want to step too much on schools' autonomy, because you hear some of the great things that we heard from our teachers, and we would squash some of those things. But what we do is we do provide a baseline as to what services should look like and what each student should get based on their area of identification.
And Mr. Haggerty, I'll just tag along with that. I think we can also acknowledge, and this is actually some of the work and data that Hanover is working to help provide us. I think it's safe to say, and you all know this as well as we do, there are times when district communications and guidance doesn't necessarily hit the mark in terms of it being consistently and fully implemented. And so I think we're already starting to see that and feedback in some of the preliminary data. So I think it's likely that moving forward, one of the key areas of focus, as Lakeisha mentioned earlier, will be to ensure that we've got accessible, meaningful communication that teachers and principals and schools have access to, and that we are able to follow up with additional guidance and clarity in terms of what this means and what the implications are for our schools. So I think you've touched on another area that we've identified that will be a priority focus moving forward.
Well, and I appreciate that. And I think that's important for parents to understand, because sometimes, they'll come at it with their own preconceived notions of what enrichment really is, right? Is it probing deeper on a standard assignment and going to another level of depth, or and I'll throw out a negative example, is it just puzzles or busy work that sometimes they think their children might be getting? So, really understanding that process, how these lessons are developed, I think is very key. Maybe, like sometimes we'll see at the beginning of a quarter where students put out, these are the standards, these are the goals we're trying to reach. If there's additional communication about here's what we expect or here's what we hope your gifted child might get out of it, that might help them understand what they're getting out of some of these assignments a little better. And I guess finally, the last one, I think this goes to Standard 4. It was interesting hearing from Green Elementary. Ms. Kushner, I still call it F.E. Green. I'm old school that way. But I just wonder, are there any efficiencies that can be gained using Title I funding for support of identification of underrepresented students at these Title I schools that might also be magnet schools? I didn't know if that's how you can go from a halftime AIG instructor to a full-time. Is that where the funding comes? Are there other opportunities to do that? It looks like I'm getting a thumbs up.
That is what I was told how I was funded here. That is correct.
The answer is yes.
I looked it up while she was talking.
Okay. Well, and
My question to that was that a local decision or was that a district? It was school-based?
School-based.
Okay.
And so is that something that maybe we can look at and evaluate, and it might be something we want to replicate in other Title I schools throughout the district?
I think that's a great example of what a responsibility we have moving forward is to identify what's happening in schools, and if it's working, let's replicate it and scale it.
Well, and I'll just to add to that, in addition to principals who use flexibility with other funding sources to do that sort of work, which I think will probably be reflected in what comes out of the Hanover research as well, I think you have to combine that with a commitment and potentially a multi-year plan for local resources to be applied as well. So I think you have to do both there.
Thank you.
Dr. Martin.
Just to build on that, because I had that same as the last question, and this goes back to our discussion earlier in the work session or in the Finance Committee meeting about allotments, right? This is some of that systemic work that needs to be done where we need to rethink allotments because, frankly, Title I too often was remediation. Title I should be enrichment. There's no reason that any student can't learn from AIG-type instruction. It might have to be at a different rate. It might have to be, need some additional supports. But enrichment instead of remediation will actually be better than remediation. So glad to hear that. And that is exactly the systemic allotment stuff that I was raising at our finance meeting. So thank you. The other thing that I just wanted to highlight, and I appreciate that some of the percentages got added between now and when it was previously going to be presented. But for the record, I think it's important to compare these. So, for example, if we take slide 20, take the percentages of identification, this allows us to understand how they are distributed within itself. But I think it's also important to compare these with respect to the representation of our population in our schools. So for the record, I went and looked it up. American Indian, we're currently at 0.3%. Only 0.1% is identified, so we're low. For Asians, we are 10.9% population in the school district, 20.9% identified AIG. Black, we're 22.3% in the district. We are 5.7% identified AIG. Hispanic, we are 19.0% identified in the district. We are 5.7% identified AIG. For multiracial, we're 3.9% in the district, 4.0% AIG. Pacific Islander, we're 0.1% in the district, 0.1% AIG. White, 43.5% in the district, 63.4% AIG. Female, we are 48.8% in the district, 46.3% AIG. Male, 51.2% in the district, 53.7% AIG. So that comparison, I think, is important when we look at this distribution, because ideally, the distribution of AIG should mirror the distribution in our district. Right now, we mirror only in multiracial, and Pacific Islander. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hustler.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. I did exactly the same thing. So luckily, I don't have to repeat what he just did. Especially for me today, we are following this right behind suspension, and the data is exactly the opposite. So that can't be lost on us, and it has to be publicly noted that for Black and Hispanic, the disparate impact here versus what we will hear immediately following you is heartbreaking, has been for as long as most people have listened, but it's even worse to watch it. And I guess the question I would have is, not question, I guess point, I don't disagree with you, Superintendent Moore, that it should be local funding, but it's also cultural. We should be talking to all of our Title I schools to say, this is what Grim Road did. All of you can do it. You all know I'm here to fight for our budget, but I'm also here to be clear to us that we can do hard things right now with the resources we have. It is a decision to make it a cultural impact decision that we are saying to all of our administrators, you can do this. We don't have to wait for somebody. We don't have to wait for Superman, which we've all seen. It's possible now, and I think, I say this every year, it's cultural. We have to make, and by culture I mean personal, school-based climate decisions, right? So let me be clear on what I mean cultural. Administrators have to be committed to do this, and it is going to be hard. But we have shining examples who came to see us today that it is possible to do it. It is possible to see the change for students of color to show up in your AIG programming when the school's climate and culture dictates that it's of importance. And so I guess for me, it's always great to say both and, but it's also important to be very clear that that has to have an exclamation point on it from this table all the way to leaders so that they know that this isn't a wish, it's an expectation.
I do think it may be helpful for one of the follow-ups for Lakeisha and her team to do is to find out what schools are doing that have additional resources and who has done this work already. Because there's some other thoughts that I've shared previously about some work that could be done with Title I funding around PD. That could be done to also support this work. So I think finding out what they're doing and being, so you know who you need to talk to would be helpful.
Ms. Kushner?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey, and thank you for highlighting the work that's being done by Ms. Ashworth at Green Elementary, and you can say Effie Green if you'd like. But also at Mills Park, where we have, a significant concentration of students who are identified AIG, and to make sure that we're also getting growth out of those students. I think the passion that I think Dr. Martin has brought to the AIG topic is about getting kids engaged in school, having kids find their some excellence that they achieve at school so that they are engaged in academics, so they aren't in the next presentation, as Ms. Johnson-Hostler points out, that they are bored at school and not engaged at being in part of that community. So I think I love the both and of making sure that that enrichment reaches most of our children. AIG teaching is excellent teaching, and it can really enliven our children's imagination. So thank you for bringing those two really strong examples to us that I'm sure there's multiple other ones in your 60-page plan. So I look forward to looking through it. Thank you for today.
Ms. Cash?
I was wondering if there is some point, whether it be in student achievement or somewhere, where we can hear about the enhancement of 4th and 5th grade AIG identified student gets in all of our schools. That's a criticism we get, is that a lot of our 4th and 5th graders that are identified AIG, and I'm all for identifying more, but I want to service them, and they're challenged, and I really want to hear about the enhancement. I want to know if we're being criticized for not challenging those kids and they're bored in school. I want to know why that's not right. So if we could have that at a student achievement meeting or somewhere, so I can see, like if at Green, the 4th and 5th graders are AIG identified and really challenged in 4th and 5th grade to be excited every day. I'd love to hear about that.
Yes, ma'am. And I think I'm looking at the superintendent, but I think it's safe for us to be able to commit to absolutely, we'll be coming back with information like that. And by the way, that's actually part of what that stakeholder survey that Hanover is working with us on asks questions like, is your child being challenged? Ask students, do you feel challenged in your classes? And so I think we'll be able pinpoint and zero in on some data, and I think to the point of the broader conversation, start to identify what's working at some of our schools, and as a district, work to replicate and scale that to all of our schools.
Right. Well, thank you both so much, and thank you to our teachers that came and took time out of your day to present the work that you do with our students with us. We really appreciate having those real-world examples. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Part 2 of Comprehensive Plan for Equitable Discipline. And there are several names on my list here, so I'm going to see who comes up. I believe Mr. Cook is not leaving us. We have Mr. Coe, Dr. Chavis.
So we have quite the crew presenting with us today, so if
And
you
you
bear
have
with us.
guest speakers as well. So wonderful. Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so just want to say good afternoon, Chair Mahaffey, Superintendent Moore, and board members. Today we're bringing to you the second part of a presentation centered on our comprehensive plan for equitable discipline. And of course, that was postponed due to weather, if you remember. And I'm joined by Drew Cook, Dr. Will Chavis, Dr. Paul Walker, Ken Jorgensen, and we're also honored to be joined by some of our school-based folks, Elizabeth Hinman, who is the ALC teacher at Wake Forest High School, Catherine Hutchinson, principal at Centennial Campus Magnet Middle School, and Nolan Bryant, principal at Cary High School. And we also have Kathy Shantos in the audience, who's been consulting with us around this work as well. So through today's session, we wanted to make sure that we're reviewing once again the updated comprehensive plan for equitable discipline, the framework that we shared with you back in April, just a quick overview. We wanted to provide you an overview of the increase of student needs we've seen throughout the pandemic. And we want to review the connections between academic and behavioral health in our work as a district. And we want to share the perspectives of the work from district and school-based staff. And we want to provide you with an overview of the data connected to discipline and the overarching work of our comprehensive plan for equitable discipline. And so you've seen this before. As a reminder of our why, we wanted to ensure that this work is connected to our core beliefs about believing that every student is uniquely capable and deserves to be challenged and engaged in relevant, rigorous, and meaningful learning each day, and that every student is expected to learn and grow and succeed, and that as the Board of Education Superintendent and all staff, we all value a diverse school community that is inviting, respectful, inclusive, flexible, and supportive. And so back in April, we presented to you an update of our comprehensive plan for equitable discipline. We call it the CPED framework. And just as a quick reminder, the updated framework has alignment to our core beliefs still. It breaks out the academic achievement actions, the behavioral health actions, the data associated with both academic and behavioral health, and the tools and practices associated with both sets of practices. And so this updated framework is also an update to our approach and how we've reported on the progress of our comprehensive plan for equitable discipline. Instead of focusing solely on the overview of the report and sharing only the discipline data as we've done in years past, we're focusing our presentation on a framing of the work we're doing as a district to address the academic, behavioral health, and equity-based needs of our students in an aligned way. And with this updated approach, we feel it's important to note that student discipline, we believe, is the result of many factors, and the more proactive we are with strategies and tools in the classroom and in our schools, we believe our students will be more engaged in school, and thus disciplinary incidents may decrease. And I just wanted to note that in Assembly we have our redacted report along with the summary of suspensions, and so if you have our presentation today will not be solely focused on those reports, but if you have questions about those detailed reports, please send them our way and we will address them accordingly. And if we go to the next slide. So with that framing, we've noted before that the needs of our students have increased throughout the pandemic, and that these factors are ones we need to continue to keep a focus on as we move forward in our work. We can't isolate student behavior on its own. We have to work in a way where behavior is deeply connected to the social, emotional, mental health, academic needs, and basic needs of our students. And as you all know, we know our teachers, staff, and administrators in our schools have been working incredibly hard throughout the pandemic to create supports for our students and families. We wanted to highlight this to ensure that our work as a district uses this holistic picture of what our students and families are going through, and that we support the work of schools from the district level through this wider frame. And as Mr. Cook mentioned, this is, I believe, the third or fourth time you're seeing this slide. So, again, to remind you, in this work, as we're continuing to transition from response to recovery from this pandemic, our work through the CPED is part of our larger multi-year transition as a district to continue to find the balance between our focus on pandemic response and our core work in delivering high-quality instruction and meeting the behavioral health needs of our students and staff. And today's presentation, again, is the second part of our presentation from April, so we can share additional information about how we are reimagining, redefining, and reinventing our work as we continue our transition from response to recovery through the lens of the CPED. And so, in moving forward in our work from a lens of behavioral health, I wanted to just remind you all that our work is, from a behavioral health lens, is focused on integrating the behavioral health factors with the academic work that our students engage in every day. It's about the merging of those two and not keeping those in separate buckets. We also want to continue our work of the behavioral health needs assessment that we've shared with you before. That's a way that since the pandemic we've worked to use the data that we believe shows us what the indicators are around the behavioral health of students in schools. We also want to make sure that we're continuing to develop our menu of best practices for schools. In this context where student needs have increased tremendously, we want to make sure our schools are equipped to understand what appropriate responses and supports are. And we'll continue to focus our work on student engagement. We will continue our food security and community partnership work that we've been doing since the start of the pandemic. We will continue our family wellness and self-care sessions. And then we will continue upgrading our mental health work, and our school-based mental health pilot that's been launched recently is an example of that. So with this frame, I'm going to now pass it over to Mr. Cook, who will share a little bit about the academic side of this work.
Thanks, Paul. I think first, like so many other aspects of our operation right now, as we, and I'm going to use these terms again, rethink and reimagine our work, it's important to us that we ensure that we're not unintentionally operating in silos, as so much of what we do is, in fact, interconnected, including the relationship between behavioral health, student discipline, and also academics. So, quite frankly, it shouldn't be left solely to Paul Coe or Paul Walker or Kathy Shantos and members of their team to every year, year after year, be the kind of sole arbiters of student discipline data each year, which is the reason why academics is represented at this table today. It should be interconnected, and it is. So while some of the strategies and specific efforts that we engage in may be different and must evolve over time, our guiding philosophy as we move forward into, again, transitioning our focus from pandemic response to a longer-term post-pandemic recovery will be as it always has been, meeting students where they are and providing them with the instruction and support that will give them the knowledge and skills to foster success in life. We just got done having a conversation specific to AIG on that exact subject. So as we support schools during this time, it's clearly evident that there's a need to access various types of data points across critical content areas such as literacy, math, behavioral health, and others to best serve the needs of our students. As we look at slide 8 here, a comprehensive assessment system excuse me, I just skipped a page. As we look at slide 8, a comprehensive assessment system combines tools. Each assessment type has an important role to play. The data gathered within assessment allows us effective problem solving in both academics and behavioral health, really across all tiers of instruction and also student groups, really in order to design responsive instruction for all kids. In response to student data, teachers leverage instructional resources, which is really the what, and instructional practices, the how. I think Dr. Martin referenced in the conversation earlier around the strategic plan the importance of not relying solely on just a curriculum resource to bring itself to life. There There are teacher moves. There are instructional strategies that can be used to really bring to light and engage with kids. And even the best curriculum in the world by itself, without an engaging, hardworking, well-planned teacher, of which we have thousands across the district, that curriculum by itself can't possibly do what it's designed to do. We also know and recognize that behavioral health is critical for our students to access the college and career readiness standards, to bridge the connection between behavioral health and academics. Our teachers work really hard to use those practices instructionally to build what is really a positive classroom culture, one that's respectful, active, collaborative, and also growth-oriented. It's important for us to continue providing and strengthening guidance and support to help all teachers learn, practice, and master techniques and protocols that build things like self-discipline, responsibility, engagement, and leadership skills in their students. This was critical and important prior to the pandemic, and I think we're seeing firsthand it's never been more important than it is right now moving forward. And so a little bit about the nexus between academics and behavioral health here. As you know, behavioral health really does serve as a foundation for achieving academic goals. While academic instruction provides an opportunity for teaching and practicing behavioral health, these two are interdependent and cannot and should not be taught in separate silos. And I know that sometimes there's feelings about things like social emotional wellness and focusing on relationships and focusing on the behavioral needs of students. But quite frankly, if we're not building classrooms that account for those things at the very foundation, then so much of the curriculum, the instructional moves, the resources don't have the intended academic impact and outcomes that we need them to have. And so they really, really are interrelated. And I think all of us have been in classrooms, for lack of a better description, where we have a teacher who, in combination with resources and supports that they need, who are able to build lasting, positive relationships with kids, who then transition that relationship into some really, really incredible learning outcomes. And by the way, when we see those incredible outcomes happening academically, not surprisingly, we also see, I think, the inverse happen in terms of the relationship with behaviors. When kids are engaged, when they feel respected, when they feel loved, when they have curriculum and resources in front of them that they can actually relate to and that mean something to them, again, not surprisingly, they perform at a really, really high level academically. And so as simple in some ways as that sounds, obviously, if it were that simple, it'd be happening systematically across the country and would have been occurring for years and years. So we know we've got work to do in that regard. So talking about a recovery through framework of systems and structures, as we move forward, we've been in the process of mapping out a longer-term comprehensive effort, as you know, that will transition us into the months and years ahead. In doing so, we'll use data and research to reevaluate and design systems and structures, whether we're talking about academics, behavioral, otherwise, that closely align to high-quality core instruction with social-emotional learning to better meet all of our students' needs. And I won't read through all of these, but you see some of these laid out here, things like a pre-K-12 comprehensive balanced assessment system, core and supplemental instructional resources, high-quality core instruction, tiered supports, et cetera. So if we accomplish this, talking about teachers and equity and family and students across the board, it is important to consider what it will look like for these groups. We would hope and expect, I think, to see several things. First, we'd want to see students who are engaged in their learning, even excited by it, and who feel safe and supported, and who are assured that they will graduate fully prepared for what's to come. They'll be critical thinkers, they'll be problem solvers, and they'll be motivated to fully participate in future learning, work, and life experiences. We want to see teachers who find joy in their work through making a difference in the lives of their students, and they need to be able to see tangible progress to validate the hard work that they're putting in. And I think, part of the theme that you're hearing today is there is incredible work happening all across this district. And it's a really hard thing sometimes to see the incredible innovative work happening and not always necessarily see the immediate returns in terms of the outcomes that we want to see, whether we're talking about breaking down disproportionality, academic, behavioral, or otherwise. And so I think that's something that we've got to be mindful of moving forward in terms of tangible progress for our teachers and our schools to be able to see and build upon. Parents and families who have a renewed faith in our district, a sense of trust that their students are learning, growing, and preparing themselves for successful and happy lives. Also, as we've said, can't say it enough, equity and access to all of our programs and services, which is no longer just a goal, but ultimately we want it to be a true given and the actual current state rather than an aspiration that we all have. And ultimately confidence among our stakeholders that Wake County students will have meet their academic and social emotional needs regardless of their race, their ethnicity, or their zip code where they happen to live. So that's a lot, and that's probably, to a skeptic, that's a lot of edu-speak and jargon, but we are committed and we're also confident that students who have been negatively impacted by the pandemic the past 2 years, academically, emotionally, behavioral, and otherwise, can and will bounce back with the efforts of our district, our schools, our classroom teachers, our parents, our community moving forward. And not just back, by the way, to where we were before the pandemic, but better than that. I don't think we have to look very far at data points, even in this presentation and the previous one, that indicate that there's much work to be done moving forward. There was work to be done before the pandemic. So I'm here to talk a little bit more about what some of that work looks like from an equity affairs standpoint is Dr. Chavis. So, Will, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Cook. I think it was right around this time, 2 weeks ago, that Drew put a period on that sentence, and we had to postpone our presentation. So I'm very happy to be here and to present. If we'll go to the next slide, thank you. As we visualize work of behavioral health and academics and equity as overlapping circles, I assert that the union of the circles would be this culturally responsive framework that you'll see on the screen now. This framework has been socialized in the past, and we will continue to do that as we're moving forward. But it's originally a framework that was created by a culturally responsive pedagogue and researcher, Dr. Gloria Latson-Billings. And this framework has three components to it, as you'll see, as we are addressing inequity within our school system and in our school settings. It's to see, understand, and then to interrupt inequity as we see it. And while most of the discussion today is around students and how we support students, it's also relevant and appropriate to think about this in context of our educators as well. So as we think about seeing inequity, and attached to that is academic achievement. We place emphasis on students' academic and intellectual achievement and growth, and students showing the ability to perform at high levels, to be able to problem solve, think critically, and to have access and understanding with the rigorous content standards that are being taught in all classrooms. And so the question that becomes pivotal and essential is, what do we want to develop what do we want to ensure and or sustain as a school with regards to academic achievement for all students? And I have full confidence that throughout every school in this school system that we yield to and we lean on core belief number one of every student each day as it relates to high academic achievement for all of our students. So this now forces us to see where we have performance and resource and opportunity gaps, and even predictability in our data, in our student data. We look at it from a lens of quantitative data, what do our metrics tell us, to include our discipline data, and then our qualitative data, what are the experiences of all of our students, particularly our most marginalized and disenfranchised students. Specifically connected to today's discussion, how might behavior impact or impede a student's ability to access or demonstrate even mastery of their learning? The next part of this particular framework, we have understanding inequity, so developing and maintaining cultural integrity. So here it's important for us to examine our performance gaps a bit more, but to also put in context the inequity and how it exists and how it has persisted over time in schooling. and to truly understand the inequity of groups of students as institutional, structural, historical, and individual. So we want academic success to not come at the expense of our students, of their cultural identity and well-being. So it is important for students to have healthy cultural identities, allowed to be their authentic selves in their classrooms, where their social and cultural capital is valued and validated. But also important that we are teaching students and each other about the cultural identity of others. And then finally, as we see inequity, we understand it, the root of the inequity, we maintain our cultural integrity. It's important for us to interrupt inequity, to develop what we call cultural or critical consciousness, So once we've been able to see and understand inequity, we must develop this consciousness to recognize, critique, and interrupt inequity. We must be willing to impact some change where we take our own paradigms and perspectives that we may have originally have had, but through seeing and understanding inequity, to center humanity, to be more empathetic, and to develop new paradigms, to break down systems and structures that have impacted students. So if we'll go to the next slide, I wanted to give that as a frame. I won't go through all of the different aspects of this, but this is where we take the culturally responsive framework. And this is on-the-ground work that the Office of Equity Affairs has engaged schools and school communities in over the years. And we've identified 3 of those buckets as to where our work lies in the office. Those 3 buckets being family and community engagement, educator and school support, and finally coaching and leadership for our professionals. Simply put, family and community engagement speaks to the work that we're doing in partnership with our families, with our community members and activists, specifically tied to the Student Code of Conduct, discipline concerns in schools, bullying and harassment, and what supports are available at the school level and throughout the system. In addition to that, what does mentoring support look like, and how do we, as not only just an office, but how does the school community support mentoring support, and what is available for our most marginalized students? In the second bucket there, you'll see educator and school support, the formation of equity teams, and how we are intentional about unpacking the cultural responsive framework, and then all other aspects of looking at data and how do we respond to the data and disproportionality that exists in our schools. Our beginning teachers are afforded opportunities to engage in and learn in partnership with our office and with each other around the culturally responsive framework, but also culturally responsive teaching strategies. And then we see that, our IAs are empowered as well and are provided additional support and professional learning opportunities. Equity Foundations courses, which is open to all of our educators across the system, thinking about racial and cultural foundations within the United States and how it impacts schooling. And then student programming. Some of you have been fortunate and have participated with our Summer Writing Institute, our young men's and women's empowerment sessions. And so that is, again, the way that we have offered and extended support to our schools. And then finally, how do we coach and support leaders as we are growing and developing our mindsets, awareness, and consciousness around equity-based leadership, especially as it's tied to discipline practices? So you'll see a couple of items there, but specifically, how do we ensure that this work isn't standalone, it's not in silos, but it's embedded into our school improvement plans? It's the visioning and strategic planning that we have and offer across our school community. And finally, our elementary and middle school discipline cohorts, and I'm going to ask if we can go ahead to the next slide. This goes to and speaks to the work that has happened already within our district and a pilot program which started in 2014-15. And this discipline group, again, it was piloted by 4 middle schools initially. The purpose of the discipline groups was to reduce the number of out-of-school suspensions, and then to reduce the number of out-of-school suspensions for African-American students due to disproportionality, reduce the number of lost instructional days, reduce the number of lost instructional days for African-American students, and then to reduce the disparities of suspensions between African-American students and white students. Again, the cohort began with 4 middle schools, And after the first year, after the 2015-16 year, there was a reduction of suspensions within this cohort by 33%, and loss of instructional days, the reduction by nearly 28%. There was a reduction of 11.5% of suspensions for African American students and a reduction of 9% of loss of instructional days. At the same time, we saw a loss or reduction of suspensions and loss of instructional days across the entire district. In the 16-17 school year, 4 additional middle schools were added to the pilot of the initial 4 schools. And then in 18 and 19-20 total schools, this is the time that we added 10 elementary schools. The initial 4 middle schools were then dropped as they were doing significant work in reducing suspensions, disparities, and disproportionality, and 6 middle schools were added. So at that time, 20 schools were together in this partnership. As far as the work moving forward, we will, as Office of Equity Affairs, will continue the work of discipline cohorts and identify schools on multiple data points you heard earlier of intense and amplified behavior based on some of the impact of the COVID and pandemic. Schools received during this time professional learning and will continue to receive professional learning from our office centered around culturally responsive framework, engagement in classrooms, how do we maximize students' time in class, and data analytics, how do we analyze our data to ensure that we are hitting the mark, ensuring that we are thinking about disproportionality and disparities, and how do we address those things. Our cohort members defined problems of practice. They attended local and national professional development, and they created a PLT amongst themselves and shared best practices. They received ongoing support from our office, so principals and their team. So this wasn't work that was just done by principals, but they had a core team that supported the work. And we will continue to examine exclusionary practices, which are direct practices of exclusion, out of school suspension and in-school suspensions, and less direct exclusionary practices. So do we have and are we maintaining a welcoming community and atmosphere for our students and their families? Again, we want to maximize time in the classroom and the learning environment, and be specific about looking and analyzing and responding to disproportionality. And then the next slide, I'm going to end with on the groundwork where our work continues to be and where we have some energy around in supporting our schools as we think about behavioral health, academics, and equity, being a thought partner to our principals and our schools. Again, the intensity of behaviors caused by the pandemic, achieving coherence with staff, not just merely reducing suspensions. I think that's possible to do, but how do we develop coherence across our community to ensure that we are doing what's right for students, we're engaging students, and we're raising achievement for all of our students. As Title IX's new legislation has come about and the process in resolving Title IX complaints, we want to make sure that the behaviors that our students are engaged in, that there's restoration, there's re-education for our students, that we're taking proactive measures to ensure that our students understand the severity and the gravity of actions, but are able to be restored back into the campus community, and just how do we socialize that out across our district. Alternates to suspensions, I believe our schools have done a terrific job in looking at and thinking about ways to keep students in the building. So what are those restorative practices? If a student is suspended, how do we restore them back so that they won't be engaged in similar behavior? And then community resources and supports. How do we utilize and tap into what's already available? And some schools have done significant work around that in bringing parents and other community members into the school to engage students. And then last but not least, the intersection of behavioral health, academics, and equity. This work and collaboration has got to be explicit and it's got to be intentional. And while I have a list of things that I hope to achieve alongside of those two groups, I think I'll leave you with two that we want to eliminate barriers that get in the way of students and their success. Provide students with what they need to fully engage in learning while incorporating perspectives, beliefs, and experiences across difference. And lastly, we go back to core belief 2, how we are able to eliminate the ability to predict student success or achievement based on social economic status, race, and ethnicity. So at this time, I'm going to pass it. You're going to hear now from Elizabeth Hinman and Ken Jorgensen.
Thank you, Dr. Chavis, and good afternoon, Superintendent Moore, board members. Ms. Hinman and I will share a brief overview and a school's perspective of how alternative learning centers can be utilized towards equitable discipline practices. Wake County provides middle school and high schools with an alternative learning center position known as ALC. This position is filled by a certified teacher that is responsible for implementing the ALC program at their school. Though an ALC teacher supports many roles, an effective ALC program focuses on student academic and behavioral success. ALC programs provide academic support and credit recovery while also building relationships with students. ALC also implements behavior lessons and strategies to improve decision-making skills and behaviors, allowing students to remain in their core classroom to receive instruction. Furthermore, ALC provides administrators with additional options to impose a consequence for students that is in lieu of an out-of-school suspension when students violate the Code of Student Conduct. All of these measures are aimed at supporting students academically, keeping them in the school building, and assisting them with on-time graduation. I'd like to introduce Ms. Elizabeth Hinman to share her experiences as an effective ALC teacher at Wake Forest High School and how their program is benefiting students. Ms. Hinman?
Good afternoon. Imagine with me for a moment. You're late for a meeting after a rough morning at home. You're speeding down I-40 at 20 miles per hour over the speed limit, hoping to make up some time. The lights flash, you pull over. Your heart is pounding, but you have no excuse. You know you are wrong, and you are caught. The officer steps to the window as you prepare for the reprimand that you know you rightfully deserve. Instead, you hear, "How can I help?" Offering help instead of punishment, relationship instead of isolation is what the Alternative Learning Center does for students in Wake County Public Schools. I will now share 4 scenarios a student might find themselves in and how an effective ALC program can help the student get back on track. Scenario 1. You made a poor choice in school and got wrapped up in some drama. You've been trying so hard to do what is right, but this just happened. How can we help? Depending on the offense, administration can make a decision to place you in ALC in lieu of suspension. Instead of sitting at home, at times without supervision, you can work with a certified teacher, getting caught up on assignments, discuss what led to the situation, and make a plan for next time to help you avoid negative consequences. Scenario 2. You have been suspended from school. You didn't complete any work at home, and now you're back at school, another week behind in your assignments. How can we help? Your administrator can give you a few days in ALC to catch up on your classwork with a certified teacher who will ensure special education services are provided if needed. When you're back on pace with your class, the ALC teacher will support your reentry by sharing strategies with your teacher and serving as a resource to help you maintain success in your classroom. Scenario 3. You are hopelessly behind in your classes. You are carrying a heavy burden on your teenage shoulders to bring in money to support your family, balance sports with academics, take care of siblings, deal with your own addictions and poor choices, or survive while facing homelessness. How can we help? Your counselor, teachers, and administrators can make a plan with your parent to place you in ALC for 5 days, 10 days, or sometimes longer if needed, full days or specific periods only, to support you while you focus strictly on your academic progress. When you return to class, your ALC teacher We'll partner with the intervention team to make sure you are keeping up with your classes as they provide needed support. Scenario 4. You are struggling with debilitating depression and anxiety exacerbated by pandemic isolation. You can't bring yourself to come into the building and face the teachers or the students. Your next therapy appointment is 2 months away. As you can see, this is most of my students. How can we help? Your counselor, school social worker, or administrator can make a plan with your parent to utilize ALC as a safe space. Here, you can comfortably complete assignments, schedule time to meet with your teachers to establish rapport, practice social skills to use with other students, and regain confidence so you can transition back to classes in a safe, methodical way. By taking a moment to pause and evaluate multiple data sources in order to see the complete student, ALC teachers are empowered to work with our on-site team to provide a structured plan to support the needs of individual students. By serving as coach, tutor, advocate, mediator, mentor, and sometimes mom, ALC teachers are able to offer the tough love these at-risk students need to want to come to the building, feel supported as they work to make better choices, and maintain educational integrity despite poor decisions. This is the beautiful work ALC teachers complete on a daily basis to ensure academic success for these identified groups of students. Working with students to overcome individual and behavioral challenges to reach their academic goals is how ALC teachers are here to help. At Wake Forest High School specifically, we utilize a team approach as part of a multi-tiered system of supports for students, including our intervention team, teachers, counselors, administrators, parents, and students. Returning from pandemic, we worked with 80 students per quarter. As we near the end of the school year, we help 30 students per day as we focus our efforts to reduce out-of-school suspensions, provide academic and behavioral support, credit recovery, and mental wellness support, all in an effort to ensure students are successful in the classroom and beyond.
Thank you, Ms. Hinman. At this time, we'll pass it to our principals for additional on-the-ground work from a school's perspective, beginning with Ms. Catherine Hutchinson, principal at Centennial Campus Magnet Middle School.
I first want to say thank you to Ms. Hinman. Her work sounds really familiar to our ISS ALC work, and I know the amount of work that goes into creating that restorative space, and so I appreciate hearing what she has shared and what's happening at her school. Thank you for having me today, giving me some time to share our story of our current work around discipline, but I would say further around our culture building approach at Centennial Campus. Our school begins with community. We believe that we live that core belief that we want a diverse school community that is inviting, respectful, inclusive, flexible, and supportive. But building that is not a simple task, and it is filled with intentionality and time. And we also know that we have to value that it will not ever be perfect. And it's not a perfect state, but it's one that we strive towards. We also know that we're a middle school, which means understanding foundationally this developmental time in a student's life is complicated. And that means we falter as well. Each year before our school year even begins, we welcome our families and are open and honest with them. We share that their students will make mistakes, and that is called learning and an opportunity. We share that we are prepared for those moments, and we want to work with the family and student through to the other side of that mistake. Every moment is an opportunity for students and staff to focus on building this community, and our end goal will always be for our students to be comfortable and confident so they are courageous enough to embark into their learning. Our students have time and again shared that it's comfort that they feel in a classroom that allows them to be able to feel that they can take the risk in learning and try the new things we're asking. When we began this year, we knew even more so that our work and community was going to need to begin again to building trust and connection. We recognize the high level of need that our families have experienced during the pandemic. We worked hard over the past year to remind our students and families of the bridge to school that did exist. Even after many home visits and phone calls, we knew it was going to be different when everyone was back in the building. I believe we leveraged that time while we were away, helping our staff to know and begin to understand the communities that our students live, with many home visits and opportunities throughout the year. The staff built a connection with home that we hoped would be stronger on their return. But coming back, we knew our intentionality had to be even more strategic. We always began this work every morning with an intentional welcome. We are positioned throughout the building, connecting, noticing, seeing our students as they stream in, learning our students and offering connections. The consistency of our presence for our students starts every day with that structure. As we proceeded into the school year, we relied on the strength of our advisory program, the intentional building of community through community circle, practice, and other strategies we have often leaned on, including the community resilience model. We encouraged each classroom that teachers should consider how to build a learning community as well. A culture of connection and leveraging our connections with students to design instruction that connects to the student. But we also saw that our students continued to falter, having lost time in working in a collaborative and active space. The mistakes we were used to seeing were just amplified this year. And we knew that we had to come back to the table to see what we could do. And I believe that is a key acknowledgement for our Centennial Campus community. We continually reflect on our own practices, we look for our patterns, and we look for responses. We built lessons for advisory that included second step conversations that allowed our students to begin to see some normalization of struggles and strategies. We crafted the lessons with our students in mind. We gathered feedback from staff on what lessons were crucial at the moment and time of the school year. Our administration team spent more time understanding and listening as we dug into the behaviors we were seeing, to understand the communication that students were trying to express. And we noticed that our parents were a group that we had to regain trust with as well. I believe that I and my administrative team probably had more impromptu meetings with parents than we've ever had before as they came to us to seek to understand. We leveraged our staff who could support translation for Spanish-speaking families. We leaned on our social worker to also be at the ready to support our families for the plethora of needs that they also brought to our school. We knew that when we called after an incident, we couldn't just share the consequence, but we offered the support we were putting into place to help our students find new success. Families responded when they heard that we knew their student, cared about their child, and wanted to work together to move forward. And all the while this year, we've collected data. We looked at the trends we were seeing. Our PLTs held crucial Kid Talk conversations weekly to talk about what we noticed and what we were learning from our students. Our instructional facilitator and administration collaborated in hearing these conversations and ensuring that we noted cross-curricular trends as well. At our quarterly review of data, the full staff sat together to notice those trends and problem-solve responses as our students adjusted to returning to school. We also had to note the trends of need and support for our staff as well. Staff development and staff meetings were strategic and responsive to that immediate need in all those areas. Our intervention team was crucial in building strong opportunities of support, first within the classroom, before considering small groups. Students built trust with our intervention teachers and then started to take advantage of those times during advisory for extra support. By the middle of the year, the students would request that connection and were open if they had the opportunity to work in small groups. We felt this was a pretty big feat. We're talking about middle schoolers. Our staff built connection, so when data came back on progress, they held small one-on-one conversations to talk with the students about their assessment data and made strategies of how to move forward. Students actually came to me showing me their iReady data, their STAR math. They would ask, they would talk about, what can I do differently? We noticed that our students leaned heavily on those behavioral skills to build confidence in their learning. They also reached out to staff who they were comfortable to talk to. Kid Talk provided us the opportunity to know our students fully and respond more strategically. I knew students that I made specific connections as they came and walked right by me in the morning. My language with students who even were tardy was not a tone of reprimand, but out of one of concern and understanding, how can I support you? I believe another key feature of our focus of Centennial Campus is building student voice in this process of school. Our students responded to this. They would seek us out for support. They began to share who their trusted adult was in the building, and they provided feedback of what wasn't working. Again, middle school students. Our students still made mistakes. They made a lot. They're middle schoolers. But I think we've done a lot to allow for growing and learning. We would make calls to families, and they would often share that they knew that we were working with them for their kids. We still have consequences, but I also believe that our families understand the why. Our students understand the why, and that they know that there is support through it. As we came to a close of this school year, we wrapped reflection with our staff. We considered what we learned that helped us move forward. We named what we faltered, and we looked closely at our systems and structures. We continued to stand with intention with our community. I meet with a different group of students every month. In these conversations, I ask them for feedback of what are the things they appreciate and what do we need to change and grow. I am time and again overwhelmed and humbled that our students communicate in these sessions their appreciation for the staff. They speak of the teachers. They talk about how the teachers care for them. They are allowed to ask questions. They are given support when they need. They openly mention that middle school behaviors are hard. These are the students admitting to this. But they know that the teachers are there to make them feel like they matter in the classroom. Every child needs to be seen and noticed as they grow older even. And I believe that our work has been built to ensure that possibility.
Thank you so much, Principal Hutchinson. We're going to now pass it to Principal Nolan Bryant.
Good afternoon. Thanks for allowing me to speak today. I think I've been sitting in that chair for a while, so what comes to mind, what I do at school often to try to lighten the mood is I tell a bad dad joke. So I thought it appropriate to share one with you just to start this talk, and that would be, how do you discipline a coffee bean? You ground it. So I was asked to speak today about some of the on-the-boots work that we're doing at the high school level to help keep students in school and reduce our suspension numbers. I would say, like my colleagues have mentioned, that when we returned from the pandemic, we knew our needs, the needs of our students were going to be greater. And so more than ever, we were going to have to really be tuned in to what we could do to support them and help them get reacclimated to in-person instruction. So we set out to tackle that task looking through three big lenses. One was the expectations and consequences that we had at our school and how we were communicating those to students, and if we were doing so in a clear fashion and in a fair fashion, and if there were ways that we could revision those to be more proactive rather than reactive. The second lens was, what work were we doing around building intentional relationships with our students, making them truly believe that we wanted them at school and that we had their best interest at heart. And the third was focused on our accessibility, leveraging the resources that we have at our disposal. We can always talk about what we do not have at the school to get the work done, but we need to focus also equally on what resources we do have and how we're leveraging those to really make sure we're maximizing their impact on student success. So as I think about those three lenses, I jotted down some notes on specific strategies that we are using at Cary High School to try to keep kids in school and make them feel a much more integral part of our culture at the school. I want to just throw the disclaimer out and say, by no means is this an all-inclusive list, and it is really just scratching the surface at what schools across this county are doing to truly try to meet the demands of our students to ensure that they're successful. So first, around expectations. So we picked up where we left off before the pandemic and recommitted to the development of a school-wide discipline expectation process, or I guess it's very similar to what you would see in an elementary school where we do PBIS in those schools. High schools, especially at Cary High School, we decided to bring on a phrase called Forks Up, and we partnered with our student council to talk about what that acronym could translate into meaning for our students and how we could use that expression that we frequently say at our school at sporting events to celebrate our athletes on the court, how we could also use that to talk about modeling what we want to see our students do in classrooms when we want them to be successful. So our student council helped us develop Forks Up posters, and what this allowed us to do was put them up in every classroom and then standardize the expectations across the entire school. We then built a practice where at the beginning of the school year, during our homeroom sessions, we spent time trying to build a class community with our students in the room, kind of having a shared discussion about what does it mean? What do these different expectations mean? What do they look like in our schools? And how should we be representing our school to positively reflect the Forks Up philosophy? Then we also follow those up through additional conversations that our administrators and our counselors have with students throughout the year when they find themselves veering off the course of success. Additionally, we took a look at our consequences and decided that earlier we were really being very reactive with our consequences, and we needed to try to be a little bit more proactive. You heard earlier some of the ways that ALC is used, and much like it's used at Wake Forest High School, we use it in a very similar fashion at Cary High School. We also started thinking about how we are using our Smart Lunch program and decided that we would turn Smart Lunch into an opportunity to spend time with students, even if they didn't want to be there. We would start using that as a way to assign students to come in for tutoring at lunch. For example, instead of giving what we had been doing was when a kid was tardy 5 times, we were assigning them a lunch detention to go sit in a room quietly during part of their social time. Well, we decided that's an easy capture for us to turn that around and say, instead, we're now going to assign you to go visit one of your teachers for 25 minutes during the first part of your lunch, and you're going to spend time catching up on work. And that gave the teacher a chance to really spend some time in small numbers with their students, building relationships. We also took our former practice of assigning students to after-school detention and shifted that to assigning students to after-school tutoring, which we began to offer 2 days a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays for 2 hours. And so we also, again, decided to turn that into spending time catching up on instructional time rather than on sitting there twiddling your thumbs waiting on the clock to expire. And then another real effective strategy that we found is instead of assigning students to ISS, we first try to assign their phones to ISS. And we have found that to be a very powerful lever. Students do not like giving up their devices. And so it is a real, we found it to be a very good deterrent for students and poor choices that they might make in class. And so what that allowed us to do was keep the student in class. It showed that we valued their time in the classroom receiving instruction, and that they could do that very successfully without their phone for a period or even a day. Some other strategies I would like to talk about fall under the lens of intentional relationship building. So at Cary High School, one of the structures we've put in place is we have alpha teams. And so we assign each assistant principal to a counselor, and together these 2 individuals are given a section of the alphabet. And so they stay with their alpha group all 4 years in school. So that lets them build a relationship with a student over the 4-year period. It also lets them get to know their parents. It also lets them get to know their special needs that they might have with their IEPs or their 504s. And then they eventually will get to know their siblings as they come through. So we found that to be a very successful strategy at helping build relationships. This team also not just gets to know the kids on their caseload, but also meets biweekly to talk about kids who are drifting off track, who might need additional support. They're counting credits, making sure we have a good plan in place to support that student toward graduation. Next, we we decided to create some mentor groups for our students to give voice to some of our marginalized groups. So we've started a group called Real Talk, which focuses on our African American male students, and I'm leveraging the capacity of my staff to help lead that group. We have another group called HEARD, with a capital H, E, and R in the word, to mean we're focusing on our minority females to give them voice and to help talk about put positive role models in front of them to help them make positive choices. We also have the Gay Straight Alliance, which gives a voice to that group. I see a lot of people looking at time, so I'll try to speed up because I know you guys have a meeting coming up. I'm sorry. We also have the Muslim Student Association and the Black Student Association are just a couple of other groups that we put together. And we found that by giving students, especially marginalized students, a group to connect with and a voice within our school community, they have a greater sense of belonging, and we're seeing positive outcomes from that. Lastly, we look through the lens of accessibility, and that would be really leveraging our counselors and our administrative team in a different way. Now, we know accessibility to the teacher is the best resource, and the relationship that is built between teacher and student, if it is positive, is going to lead to the greatest outcomes. But beyond that, what can the counselors and administrators do to help support our students and to identify additional students who might need to be placed on the radar for more support? So one of the ways we've done that is our counselors have created a thing called Counselor Corner, where they set up outside the media center in the center of our school every day, and they take walk-up appointments throughout the day for students who need help or need assistance, whether it's advice about college, schedule changes, trying to deal with a peer situation. We also have created IMP stations where each day of the week we have things going on in a classroom designated for kids to come to if they're feeling lonely or need to relax or deal with stress. And so we have Mindfulness Mondays, Board Game Tuesdays, Calm Down Wednesdays, and Creative Thursdays. This gives our kids a chance to kind of network and build relationships with adults and students. Our administrative team is located each day. We have administrators assigned to be in a place that we call the Impact Office. And the Impact Office is a special office in the center of our school. And one of the requirements of that job is you do handle discipline that comes out during the day where students may be sent out of the room for misbehavior. But instead of just issuing consequences, we use that forum as a chance to talk to kids, to mentor to kids, to coach kids about how we might go back and re-enter the classroom for the rest of the period. How might we go about restoring that trust with that teacher and that individual? We also deal with, we use that as a forum for our assistant principals to continue to cultivate the relationships they're building with their students, their mentoring relationships they have. We peer mediate in that setting. We also offer students to help facilitate conferences with students so we can talk about a plan for graduation. And then we try to tackle the tardy issues that seem to be very prominent right now with our high schoolers in this time of getting back into in-person instruction. So I know that was pretty quick, but I was trying to hurry up and get through some of the strategies. And so what we'll do now is we'll look at the outcomes of the school year. Our year's not quite over. We'll look at those outcomes and then go back to our retreat and talk about where we need to continue to improve to do additional work to reduce suspensions. So thanks for letting me share our strategies today.
Thank you so much. And we certainly appreciate Mr. Bryant and Ms. Hutchinson and Ms. Hinman sharing those real-world examples of how we're meeting our students. I heard a lot of student voice, building relationships, and making sure that our students feel safe and comfortable, even if we are dealing with behavior issues. So we really appreciate hearing the work that you and your teams are doing in your school to make sure that our students don't become one of the numbers that are later on in this presentation. And with that, since there are 11 slides left, we are going to have part 2.5 at our next work session. But I appreciate Mr. Coe, Dr. Chavis, Mr. Cook, Mr. Walker, Mr. Jorgensen setting up that framework so that we can have that discussion moving forward. But we know that each one of those students in those slides is a student where we can improve. So we look forward to that at our next work session. At this time, our work session is over. We went a little bit over, but not too much. But we will get set up for our regular meeting. Thank you.